Tonight we're gonna start getting into the nitty-gritty of being an emergency medical technician. We're gonna start with we're gonna do scene size up tonight, primary assessment, and then the principles of assessment. So basically that will just be our history taking, the different mnemonics that go along with it. That will be what the principles of the assessment are. It's kind of the meat of it. But to start with, as you go to any scene, whether it's fire, as a fireman, a police officer, or EMT, scene size up is the very first thing we take care of. It's done in the truck even before you're on scene. You're sizing up the scene. You're looking for hazards. You're looking for dangers and red flags that say this scene is safe, this scene is not safe. So.
The email that was recorded is missing an R, that's why. So he's gonna fix that.
Oh. There we go. All right, so basically our scene size up is going to include our checking of the scene safety, standard precautions, noting mechanisms of injury or illnesses to patients, how many patients that we have. Remember, there's even medical calls, you can have multiple patients depending on the call at hand. CO alarms, you can have multiple patients. So you also need to look at, do you have enough resources? It's just you and your partner on the truck. Is it enough to take care of the people there? Or do you need additional resources? Do you need police? Do you need fire? These are all part of the scene size up. These are going on from the time you approach the scene to your initial, probably first minute or two on scene. The only predictable thing about an emergency is that they are often unpredictable. That's about the best way to describe any sort of scene. Medical, fire, police, it's chaos. It's vaguely controlled chaos. So if we're talking about an accident as you're approaching, you're looking, listen for other emergency units responding. They may be coming from different directions. You don't want to crash into another emergency vehicle. You ever seen the videos of those? It doesn't look good in the public's eye when a fire truck crashes into an ambulance or vice versa. Doesn't look good. So always keep an eye out, always keep an ear out for that, where they're coming from. Look for other signs of collision-related power outages. Are the lights, is it at nighttime, so are the lights down the street blocked? Are they all out? Are all the houses lit up? Are there porch lights on? Look for things like that. Look for downed wires. Observe the traffic flow. People get rubberneck around these things, so keep an eye out very closely for other people. They tend to drive like idiots around this stuff because they want to see this. So you see this, so they may swerve into the other lane as you're trying to come in. So, and can also look for smoke in the direction of the collision scene. When you get within sight of the scene, start looking for other things. So our hazardous materials, we talked about that in the MCI and hazmat class. Keep an eye out for any sort of placards or anything that might be labeled on a vehicle that might indicate that there's hazardous materials. Look for victims that are on the road or in the road or off the road. They may be in the ditch. So take a look at the car. You're looking kind of at the car and the collision forces and where it happened. And then also look for the broken utility poles and downed wires. You don't want to approach anything with downed wires, especially if they're sitting on top of the car. When within sight of the scene, be alert for persons that are walking along the side. Also try to keep track of people that you see walking around to make sure that, number one, they're not someone that's trying to get away from it because they know they just crashed and screwed up royally. Make sure they're not, oh no, I just saw it, see you later, it wasn't me. Keep tabs on all the people that are kind of around that scene. They might be witnesses that can help tell you what happened. So as we get into the assessments a little further, we'll learn about forces. So having witnesses as to what actually happened and what kind of forces were at play with collisions can help tell the tale of injuries that might have occurred in your patients. And then watch for your signals from your police officers and fire service personnel. I know when we come into accident scenes, if the fire department's on scene before us, a lot of times they direct us in where they want us to necessarily park. They might have a specific spot that they want us. So keep an eye out for things like that. Follow the instructions of the IC. Typically, fire will have command at a scene like this. Work with them when it comes to patient care. If you say that a certain patient needs to be coming out first due to injuries, they should be listening to you, but ultimately they make the decisions on how the actual removal of the process happens. But your voice matters when it comes to which patients may be taken out. Don the appropriate protective equipment. Make sure you're wearing ANSI approved reflective vests. All ambulances should be wearing them, or should have them on board for you to put them on. If you're going to be going into a car due to you have to crawl inside the car to start taking care of the patient while they're extricating, make sure you're putting on approved like bunker coats, helmets, gloves, stuff like that to protect yourself. And sniffer odors, that may indicate hazardous material. Gas smells pretty, I think everyone here probably knows what gas smells like. If you smell gas, I'd stay away until they foam the scene. You guys ever foamed a scene for accidents too much?
No.
I've only seen it happen once. Makes a god-awful mess.
Oh, it's a mess, yeah.
But does happen occasionally with leaking fluids if it's a large leak. So establishing a danger zone. This is an area around every vehicle collision that kind of keeps this like, this is the danger area. Everybody should stay outside of it if you're not directly involved in extrication or patient care. So some of the specific guidelines for this, like at least 50 feet in all direction if there's no apparent hazards. If there's fuel spilled, it should be 100 feet in all directions to keep bystanders away so nobody accidentally gets hurt if something catches fire or blows up. We don't want more injuries when we don't have to, or more first responders in that area if it's not necessary. If the vehicle's on fire, again, 100 feet in all directions. Nobody wants to breathe in the crap that comes from cars when they burn. Wires are down. Stay one full span of wires away. That's probably 50 to 100 feet in itself.
We usually go 2 to 3
poles.
poles.
Yeah, 2 to 3 poles isn't a bad idea. Yeah, just remember that wires are probably the most dangerous thing on car accidents that you have to be aware of. Just if those poles are down and it arcs something, like, could kill you, it can kill a lot of other people. There's a lot of voltage that comes through there. Obviously, hazmat's involved. Check the ERG book. We're not going to hound on that because we talked about that for an hour and a half before. So, any questions on collisions and accident scenes on size up? Kind of makes sense? Okay. So, when we're talking about crime scenes or acts of violence, these are situations where you might not know what you're getting into. It may come in as a fall. It may come in as an assault. It may come in as something that doesn't necessarily like a fall. You may, it's just a fall. It's just someone that needs help up, or slipped on the stairs and may have broke their leg or hit their head. It may sound innocent, but when you get there, evidence may show different signs there. Husband beat his wife, or vice versa. Could be things like that. So you want to keep an eye out for these things. Fighting or loud voices. You want to look for like weapons visible. Like look for some odd things in the story. These are the kind of scenes where you might be there first. You might have to go back to the truck and call for help. And that's okay. When you're with these types of calls, whenever you go to someone's house and you have to knock on the door, don't stand in front of the door. Stand off to the side. After you knock, you and your partner should be off to the side of the door. Don't stand directly in front of it, just in case they decide to it happens to be a suicidal person that decides to blow a shotgun through the door. Happened to one of the police officers just last year.
Yeah.
Was it last year?
Yeah.
Last year or the year before. That happened. He went to do a welfare check on someone and someone shot right through the door at him. So it happens. Yeah, he didn't get hit.
McCarty and Thomas were on the scene.
Yeah. So it does happen. So just keep doorways in mind with stuff like that. Always stand off to the side. Other signs you're looking for: alcohol, drug use, unusual silence. Is the person that you're there to evaluate and look at? Are they not wanting to answer your questions? Do they kind of giving you roundabout answers about things? Something not lining up right. And then knowledge. Hey, I've been to this place before. Dude beats his wife. Keep those thoughts in mind also. Although any call can present a potential safety hazard, what types of calls might pose the highest threats of potential violence? What do you guys think? What are some other ones? Active shooter, yeah. What are some other medical calls that might?
Chemical spill.
At a party.
Brain injury.
Chemical spill, parties.
Brain injury. Factory.
Huh?
Brain injury.
Brain injuries, yeah.
Factory.
Factory, yep. Brain injuries.
Bar.
Yep. Why do you think brain injuries?
Because they might be bad themselves.
Yeah. They might not be themselves, they might be thinking that something else is happening, or their brain's just so addled at that point that, yeah, they might fight you.
We had that a couple years ago, or last year, the year before, over at Bondado. The guy maybe had a brain bleed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they ended up, that was a very physical
Took how many off?
Took 3 or 4 officers, both of our
Your guys, I was
both
there.
of our guys,
Russell was there.
fire, it took multiple guys to pin this guy down. He was,
Yeah,
and this was just a brain bleed,
here's the brain, yeah.
so,
Did it screw up his neurological system or something?
yeah, that's what TBIs typically will do. That's why they get violent. Guy didn't mean
He didn't
anything
do
that
it,
he
yeah.
did, he just, you don't have any control over stuff like that.
Somebody suffering from PTSD kind of present the same way.
Sure,
If he was triggered, or
Yeah,
they were triggered.
yeah. A lot of things can present with that altered mental status, or that pose that drugs and alcohol. People get violent on drugs and alcohol. Those are other calls that you want to keep an eye out for. So,
Probably Alzheimer's patients or
I was
dementia
gonna
patients.
ask.
yeah, there's
Absolutely.
I've had some definitely some threatening little ladies before. It happens. You know, you can't hold it against them. You know, that's a horrible disease. But yet that's one where they can get a little violent.
Especially that little 98 soaking pound wet old lady.
Yep.
She probably, yeah.
When I was in medic school, one of my instructors got punched right above the eye by a lady. She wasn't from Alzheimer's. It was because she fell out of bed, smacked her head, and her O2 saturation was 68%. So she was
Oh,
hypoxic.
yeah.
And we were trying to hold her still, and she slipped my grip and punched my partner right above the eye. Luckily, it was a glancing blow, but still, it happens. So good. So when we say standard precautions, do you guys have your e-sheets tonight?
Oh,
Do you have them with you?
oh.
Might not be a bad idea to pull them out, because you're going to see scene size up right at the top of the patient assessment management. If you don't, you can share or just
Joe, what's the website?
on nremt.org. So scene size up's right at the top. And you're going to see one of the first things, even before scene size up, take or verbalize appropriate PPE precautions. So this is I'm going to put my gloves on and take proper BSI scene safety. Okay. So what are standard precautions for body substance isolation? What's body substance isolation? Anyone? Take a guess.
Glove, mask, everything.
Mask, gloves, and eyewear. That's about the most basic, every call PPE that we wear. But BSI can encompass gowns, face shields, hair nets, can be everything. But the standard of it is gloves, face mask, eye protection. Especially with trauma patients, eye protection, highly recommend. Alright, so now we're going to get into the nature of the call. Why have we been called in the first place? Are we here for an injury? Are we there for an illness? Are we there for both? Sometimes accidents happen due to a medical issue. Sometimes we're treating both injuries and illnesses at the same time. So, let's talk about mechanisms of injury first. So these are the forces that may obviously cause the injury, whether it's blunt, penetrating, burns, or other. So we need to understand these forces so we can predict the energy forces that go through the body and parts that might be contacted that might make contact. So steering wheels into the chest, smacking your head on the airbag, snapping it back. These are all forces that you have to be aware of and thinking about when you're treating these patients.
Deceleration trauma.
Yep, accelerate, decelerate, yep.
I was in a car accident years ago, and I didn't realize until I left the emergency room how badly I was bruised just from the
seatbelt.
Seatbelt.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm like, this is not fun.
Airbags are no joke.
Yeah, no, my mom broke her sternum actually on a head-on collision where her
I
airbag
literally
hit her in the
had a
chest.
black and blue mark that was like
65, 70 miles an
a
hour or something?
freaking seatbelt.
What they come out at?
Faster than that.
Is it faster?
Yeah, I think it's like 100, like
Is it
120
100?
miles an hour or something
Yeah.
like that. They come out fast.
Oh, I know, yeah.
But seatbelts do. Funny thing is, seatbelts do damage, and it's something that can cause serious injury. But it's one of those things where the chances of it causing serious injuries outweigh the chances of if you're not wearing it,
Yeah.
you're gonna die in the same accident.
Yeah,
so.
the worst, what's the best of two evils?
Right.
Yeah, I'll take
So.
a bruise.
Yeah, absolutely. You might end up with some broken ribs or a broken clavicle, possibly, but better
Better going
than.
through the windshield and ending up in a.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and wall.
So
Or
being
underneath
thrown
the
100
car,
feet.
yeah.
You can also get it to like go in your neck, right? If you don't wear it right.
If you don't wear it right, yeah, it can cause problems here. That's why you're supposed to. That's why those seatbelts adjust now, and you should always adjust it so it goes over your shoulder. So we want to understand these forces. So, look at the car. When you get on these scenes of these accidents with these patients, look at the cars, see where the damage is. Take the story into account. Spidering, yeah, that's actually I think on the next slide.
Yeah, it's usually pretty common, yeah.
What's spidering? Does anyone know what Victor's talking about when we talk about spidering?
Glass shattering.
Yeah, what's it usually caused from?
Your head
With
would
the head,
Yeah, head hitting the windshield, the spiders. Looks like a beautiful spider web.
Yeah.
Meaning you probably weren't restrained because if you were, those
Correct.
airbags would.
Typically,
That's okay.
typically you won't see
Question,
spidering if they were restrained.
Yeah.
It's pretty rare to see it. But so we're looking at these things. We want to know: is it side impact, head in? Is it rear impact, front impact? Driver side, passenger side. Because if it's passenger side with the driver, do you think the driver still got some of that force of that collision?
Oh, yeah.
Got some, but not the full impact.
You didn't get the full impact, but you're still going to get some of that transfer of energy to your body. So head-on collisions, we look at kind of two types of injuries. Patterns we have our up and over and our down and under. You guys remember have you guys read the chapter? Remember what the differences between those are? Anyone want to take a guess? Nothing really tricky about them, it's literally how it sounds.
Our under is down, and you're going to expect to see lower leg injuries, hip injuries, possible
Yeah.
dislocation of the pelvis.
Yeah, you go underneath, you basically go underneath the steering wheel.
Possibly pinned into the vehicle.
Yeah, pinned into the vehicle well. So typically you'll go under. Up and over is the opposite. You go up and over into the windshield or out the windshield.
Suspect chest injury, head injury on the
Yep.
upper body.
So these are the different patterns we want to look for, so we can get a better idea of where we're going to find the injuries. Now just remember, energy transfers. So if you go down and under, and your feet hit that firewall under there, remember all that energy is transferring up through the body. So that doesn't mean you're not going to have cervical spine issues, but it's least likely than the up and over of smacking your head and crushing your spine from that direction. But it still can happen because energy still transfers up through the body. But it's just got a lot more to go, and it's got some very large bones to go through. So here's kind of a little, you can kind of see the spidering on the windshield there with the airbag deployments. So yeah, so we want to obviously make sure which airbags are deployed. Cars have numerous types of airbags now. It's not just steering front airbags. We have side airbags, we have rear airbags. Your airbags are built into the seats now. So I think Toyota has things that come out from under the seat kind of for airbags. So we get airbags in all sorts of areas. So and those side airbags don't necessarily mean front airbags are coming out. So get hit from the side airbags come out, but the steering wheel doesn't come out.
You're gonna smash your face off the steering
Still a
wheel.
possibility of smashing your face off the
Which is no
windshield.
fun.
So keep in mind we're looking at a lot of different things when we're looking at the patterns of collisions, thinking about energy transfer through the car, through the body. These are quite forceful and quite a lot of energy gets transferred. So here's a great picture of what spidering looks like. Yeah, imagine hitting your head into the windshield after crashing 50 miles an hour into basically a brick wall. Alright, so rear ends, side impacts, or T-bones, broadsides, or others, and then rollovers. Rear ends are probably one of the more commons we go to. They can be pretty severe, especially for anyone sitting in the back. This is also typically where we see our whiplash injuries a little bit more. That sudden forward, because what happens when you're here is when they hit you from the rear, your head actually ends up staying still for a moment, so the whole body goes forward, snaps your head forward, and then snaps it back. So you typically see your whiplash injuries more with rear end impacts. The minor ones, we call them Dewey, Dickham, and Howes. If anyone gets that joke, let me know. It's a little play on words. My medics instructor told me that one. So it's typically where people want to just, they make up injuries because they want to sue the other person.
It's true.
It's very true though. But what are some other injuries you might expect to see from rear end collisions? Could we see?
Projectiles, things in the back, come back and hit you in the back of the head.
Yep, that's a great one. People don't think about that. Oh, that ain't gonna go anywhere.
Groceries,
Yeah,
all
well,
kinds of stuff.
Things
Sack
come
full of Campbell's soup.
Yep.
Well, my car accident was last winter. I hit a guy that ran a stop sign, him going 55 miles an hour. Never thought 8 sandbags would come flying and push my bed forward 8 inches just from hitting that.
Yeah.
You know, almost going through the back window.
Yep. Yeah, projectiles, that's a huge one. People don't think about that a lot of times when they put things in their back seat, especially things that are pointy.
What?
And the sticks places. T-bones, what kind of injuries do you think, what kind of forces do you think we're thinking about with our T-bones, our side collisions?
Total anger.
Total anger?
I got T-bone. I just paid off a pickup truck.
Oh,
Two months, and some kid with freaking no insurance T-bone.
T-bone. Of
Oh,
course, no insurance, yeah.
Well, his aunt had it, but
that should be grounds for murder.
no, it literally knocked the transmission, the actual thing
Yep.
was about 300 feet up the road.
Wow.
Did you get driver's side or passenger side?
Driver's side, just it was like a regular cab. It was right there in
Yeah.
the bed. If it
That
had
one
been
was
like,
bad.
if it had been here,
Yeah.
sayonara.
I'll be
That's-
surprised if that driver lived during that.
Oh,
What kind of injuries do you think we're looking at though?
A lot.
Think
you get
hip,
Arm,
yeah,
leg,
hip, 100%.
arm, leg,
Femur.
head.
Possible broken.
Tib fit.
you
Sorry.
got
Legs.
leg injuries and stuff like
Oh
that.
yeah, you
Shoulder,
could find a
wrist.
lot. I'd say T-bones are probably the most
They're
serious nowadays. Probably more. I would say getting hit T-bone nowadays in cars is more dangerous than getting hit head on.
Because they're least protected.
Yeah.
They're the least protected, and the way cars are designed for head-on collisions now is those cars are designed to crumple around the driver and the passengers now. Like, so when that crushes in, everything's designed to end up and envelop you so you don't get damaged. All the energy gets transferred around you.
Unless you're the one who's getting hit.
Yeah,
That was
Right.
like one that you don't want to be seatbelt
But-
on.
these ones, there's nothing protecting you anymore. It's really at this point. So, yeah, there's side airbags, but there's a lot less between the door and you than the front of the car and
You
you.
have the whole engine and
So.
everything in front of you.
Right. So, and like I said, everything's designed now to
There's no
crumple
There's
around
definitely
you.
no crumple zones on the side of the
No.
car.
So.
I came onto a T-bone in Jeffersonville, and it was pretty bad.
Boy,
I was
it's
the
must
first
have hit
person
hard.
there, and
Yeah,
I
it's
still remember it. She was messed up. She was
It's
trapped.
like a late night
Yeah.
car,
Her
so
ankles were
much
crushed.
you could crumple
I
out.
walked away from that one.
Yeah,
I was sitting there going like, I look at the truck going like,
Broken femur, flail chest. She had a fractured skull and had a arterial bleed and was spurting blood when I first got there. So
Jesus.
yeah, I climbed in and stopped the bleed. And it's the 4th of July, so Cambridge Rescue was up at Smugs. It was almost 20 minutes. And Cambridge Fire Department showed up and cut everything off while I was in there. And yeah, it was. There was no protection, nothing.
Yeah.
And they couldn't get her out for a while. We were going to call Life Flight, but by the time we got it off, we went right through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they cut the whole.
Probably, that'd probably be your easiest bet by the looks of it.
I'm guessing if they haven't torn anything, that patient either is probably dead or
For a 90s car like that, to
Hanging
get
on.
it back like that, they had to hit hard.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a Buick.
So. Rollovers. What kind of injuries do we think we're looking at with rollovers?
Head injuries?
Neck,
Yeah.
back.
Neck, back, head.
depending on how the damage is, because if they roll on driver's side.
So let me ask this question two ways. What injuries do you think you would have seatbelted?
Not much.
You still have some.
Still have some. What would you most likely have with a seatbelt in it, like a rollover?
Probably bruises and pins.
Abdomen's probably pretty.
From the
Abdomen.
belt, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Also
Maybe
stuff
that.
in the car.
So
for
that's
sure.
so that's like a
Back.
kind of like, is that like less damage type of rollover or what? Because I've been to rollovers where there was like no damage.
They
on
get
the
out of the car,
at
and
all.
you push
Take
it
it out,
off,
and you're good to go.
Yeah.
And then there's rollovers that we've been to and they're trapped.
So we're
you know
just
what I mean?
so we're just talking in general, rollovers in general. We're not talking about specific ones. We're just going to talk in general because when we start playing with the variables, we can be
You know how it
specific.
is.
I want you to think about any rollover you've ever been to or haven't been to. Just think about any rollover, whether it's minimal or massive. Think about the types of injuries you might have seatbelted.
Your
Probably
head could
some
still snap
shoulders.
off.
You still got your head and neck.
Yeah.
We talked possibly abdomen,
Abdomen, yep.
seatbelts, kind of
Cuts.
issues.
Shoulder.
Shoulders. Yep. Okay.
Arms moving around, you know, they can get
Yep.
either in the steering wheel, which would flip around.
Okay.
or wrist.
Now let me ask you this: same accident, no seatbelt.
Oh,
Thrown
Jesus.
from the car.
Could be
Yeah,
death.
for looking
Bingo.
for somebody.
Thrown from the car.
Yeah.
Getting rolled up, getting the vehicle crushing you.
Yep.
Or you got somebody who's, they're strapped in and it's like they're okay and then it's like, boom, and now they let themselves loose and now
They fall down.
they fall down, go boom.
Oh, half in, half out too.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
happened in Swanton a couple years ago. They had
Yeah.
roll over and
Arm
Russell
band
Road,
or
yeah.
something.
So yeah, so knowing whether or not they were
Try
wearing their
to-
seatbelts is pretty important in these ones, just so we
Oh,
can
you're gonna
have an
know.
idea of.
yeah.
Yeah, you're
Well,
they're
if
outside the vehicle.
they're
Most
outside, you're
likely
gonna know.
they're weren't wearing their
So the
seatbelt.
last one we went to, they walked out before we were even there.
All right.
Get a lot of them.
Walked right in the ambulance and
Yeah,
everything.
sometimes.
So rotational impact collisions. So these are the ones that get hit in the
One
rear
side.
end or front and just spin. Kind of we get one impact, we also get subsequent impacts. Why do we get subsequent impacts?
Well, that's
Your
that's
body
exactly
can-
what happened when I got T-boned. When they hit me there, that thing spun me around like 1.5 times.
Yep.
And let that drivetrain fly.
Yeah.
But everything was still on 4 wheels. It
Yep.
never flipped or rolled and everything.
Right.
But that I was turned around the opposite way, going the other way
Yeah.
on the road.
When I say subsequent impacts, what am I talking? What are we talking about?
Guardrails, telephone poles,
Other
other
vehicles.
cars.
How about you?
You could like.
Yeah, you get
in
flipped
the
out and
car.
you get run over.
You get flipped out, or you get hit, so your leg smashes against it. Your leg smashes the dash. You go, when you spin and then suddenly hit something else. Now suddenly you stop, so now you've got
The other
that
way. Yeah.
Pinball effect.
that pinball effect.
Stop me off.
So keep in mind, so always keep that in mind too. Subsequent impacts is also talking about the person inside that vehicle. It's also undergoing multiple impacts, not just the car. All right, so another thing, falls. Adults, so we're looking at serious injuries for adults at more than 20 feet. If more than 20 feet, that's considered a severe mechanism of injury that can cause serious harm. Children under 15 years, it's more than 10 feet, or 2 to 3 times the child's height. So the way patients land can provide clues to injuries. With the way this guy's laying, what kind of injuries do you think he
At
suffered?
the back for sure.
Back
Back, legs,
Looks like leg.
Head probably. Yeah.
head,
Lower arm or two.
Internal.
internal.
Probably some internal. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it looks like
Maybe.
laying on some wood. So.
Yeah, shoulder.
Yeah.
Could
What
be.
did he? Yeah.
A lot of things. Head,
Yeah.
Broken.
Hard to know without actually getting your hands dirty and start asking what happened.
He probably doesn't remember what
Is he
happened.
But this is what scene size up is. This is part of scene size up. When you're walking up to this guy, you're taking a look at how he's laying. Is his leg caught back underneath? Is that arm over there? Is this arm like these fingers touching his forearm? Because you can't really see it from this picture, but he's got a board on it.
Their bones popped out.
Yeah, their bones pop out. Like you're not gonna know this until you basically strip them naked. And trauma patients get stripped naked. Everything off.
Cut it off.
Trauma naked.
And that's a big fail too in the NR EMT class.
Yes.
If you don't find
If you
every single.
look down at your trauma station, which I think is on the second page. Yeah. There is a
that the criticals?
Yep.
Yeah.
Go down into it. So you get two here. You can get failure to find or appropriately manage problems associated with airway breathing and with shock or hemorrhage, and then there's also perform other assessments before assessing, treating threats to airway breathing and circulation. Okay. Someone has a puncture wound right here.
Or a big wound.
Is that, or, yeah, it's a puncture wound. If they have something here, is this a threat to airway and breathing?
Yes.
Okay, needs to be treated first. You would be surprised at how many people forget to, when you take your test, the patients will have basically breakaway clothing. They're all like, their clothing has already been cut and it's Velcroed back together, so it's very easy to make them trauma naked. Make them trauma naked.
Roll them
Take
over.
my advice, cut their clothes off. Take them off. They wear shorts underneath, so you're not actually making them naked. But take their clothes off, find stuff. I have failed people before because they have not found things that need to be found. I hate failing people, but when they don't do that simple task, so trauma patients, make them naked.
Is there any indication, like, in the testing, like, a puncture wound up here would obviously, in real life, the clothing would be bloody and punctured? And you just
So
cover it up.
in the testing there won't be. It'll be moulaged, like they'll probably have moulage done, so they'll actually have a wound underneath the shirt,
Yeah.
but there won't be any like signs of it, so you'll have to actually make them naked. And you'd be surprised, sometimes wounds don't bleed like you think they would.
Where do we do that?
Yeah, there are actually cases where people get stabbed in the chest and very, very minimally bleed.
We had a lady,
It happens.
a girl in a four-wheeler accident cut her leg wide open, like from one side to the other,
Yeah.
and there was no blood at all.
Yeah, so, it all depends on what you get for
All I saw was
medicines.
tissue, it was crazy.
Oh yeah, a lot of tissue.
A lot of tissue.
So when we're talking about falls, other important factors are the height, number one, that's probably one of the most important things. The surface that they fall onto. Is it wood, dirt, concrete, water? What did they fall onto? And did anything interrupt the fall? So did they land on a bouncy ball? Did they land on a trampoline and bounce off to the ground? Did they fall on another human being? So these are also important questions.
Could fall off a tree limb.
Yeah. Penetrating trauma. So obviously this is where we're talking about knives, gunshots,
We're on page 307.
and injuries. So any sort of projectile that would enter the body. Passes through the skin or other body tissue. It's classified by the velocity of the item that caused the injury. So low velocities are knife injuries typically. So we have damage is limited to an area that it kind of penetrates around, but you can have multiple wounds. Obviously some people will get stabbed multiple times, especially if we're talking like the prison and prisoners getting shanked. You might be dealing with multiple little lacerations, but it's typically the damage is limited to that area that they were stabbed. Medium velocity, which would be considered our handguns, and high velocities from rifles, can be anywhere in the body. Not only do we get damage directly related to the projectile, we get pressure-related damage
Around the area.
around the area and through the body. So when a bullet enters, a little ballistics here, when the bullet enters the body, it causes a cavitation. So you get the initial channel wound that gets, but as it enters and expands, it causes cavitation. So just because the bullet enters through here, you can still get damage through the body at different locations as that bullet creates that pressure, changes that pressure through.
If it doesn't
Then
exit.
did it
it's gonna
exit?
take-
And then it also can exit and also might not exit
If it
depending on the
doesn't exit,
caliber.
it can do a lot
Well,
of
you do have
damage.
discrepancy as far as like caliber and whatnot.
Yep.
I mean, you get
Oh, yeah.
shot with a 5.56 versus a 50 cal,
Then-
you get shot in the ass with a 50 cal, you're dead.
If you get shot anywhere with a 50 cal, you're probably dead.
Yeah.
So, but a 5.56 is probably most likely going to go through and through. But as fast as that,
Might
round is,
might tumble a little bit, but.
yeah, and that's the biggest thing with small rifle calibers like 5.56. 7.62 by 3.9 also, you get that tumbling effect when it hits, so it doesn't go straight through. When it hits, it actually starts to tumble, so it creates a larger wound cavity, can do more damage and also cause greater cavitation.
7.6 is also lower velocity, it's high impact, low velocity.
Right. But you still get some, you still get a little tumbling with a 7.62 by 3.9. 308, you're dealing with the higher speeds where you'll probably get through and through without.
Now you're starting about arc.
Yeah. So we want to keep that in mind with medium and high velocity or things like our handguns, rifles. I would say bow and arrows, crossbows, probably in that medium velocity range. Arrows obviously present a slightly different approach than like a handgun or a bullet, because arrows typically will not pass directly through you, like a bullet possibly can.
Tip or a broadhead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what are we worried about with if someone is shot by a bow or a crossbow? What's the biggest worry with? What's one of the biggest pieces of information we want to know? Guns, we know we want to know the caliber.
We want to know the
The
handle.
tip on the arrow. Is it a practice tip? Is it a broadhead? Is it some sort of special?
Is it expansion? Or
Is it an expansion tip?
Not distance?
I mean, distance doesn't bother me as much as what the tip is, because the tip's going to help tell me what kind of damage it does. If it's a straight practice tip,
Blunt tip, yeah.
it's probably not going to do a ton of damage except for that specific area where you got shot. If it's a broadhead, it can tear up a lot of crap inside you. So you can get, if it goes into your gut, you can tear up your intestines, your stomach, pancreas, liver, depending on where you get hit. So it can tear up a lot of different stuff. Or you're expanding broadheads. So you want to know that. Distance, not so much, because you're going to know that's going to be penetrated. That arrow is going to be stuck in them. What's the biggest thing with penetrating trauma? Knives, arrows.
Take it out.
Yeah, leave it in. Leave it in. Do not take it out. This is not 911 Houston or 911 LA. We do not remove. Huh? Well, probably melt. But
We just wrap around
the other thing is,
stabilize it,
with
transport.
arrows,
Yes.
you got it, almost certainly you got infection,
Yeah.
because they're not heated, they're not a gunshot.
right, you're gonna have a lot of problems. And like Dustin said, so you're just going to secure it. Now it's okay to, like, if you have an arrow and it's sticking
Cut it
out
off.
this far, you can snip it, cut it off closer, secure it nice and tightly so it doesn't move, leave it. Surgeon's gonna have to take that out.
We're not surgeons.
We're not surgeons. The surgeon's gonna have to take that out because there's a lot of vascular issues that need to go on, and this needs to be carefully taken out, not just ripped out.
No.
Any other penetrating traumas you guys can think of that might happen? I mean,
Wood, splinters, big enough,
Ever get hung up in a barbed wire fence?
no. It's been punctured by barbed wire before. It doesn't feel very good.
Piece of rebar like falls off a truck. You know what's happened?
What is it?
I know back in Georgia, was it last year, SDI, I mean, it didn't hurt her or anything, but a piece of rebar from their truck came off and went through her windshield, but it didn't hit her, but.
What are some more? What are some?
You're talking 65-70 on the interstate.
Can anyone think of any other more common penetrating injuries?
Well, this happened on ski patrol. Skier skis into a branch and it impales him.
Yeah.
Some kid sticks another kid in the eye with a pencil.
Yep. School-related stuff. Yep. Okay. Cool. Come on. All right. Blunt force trauma. Injury caused by a blow that strikes the body but does not penetrate the skin. Signs can often be very subtle, can be easily overlooked. Your index of suspicion for injuries with blunt force should be very high for internal damage. Why is that? Why do you think you should, even though you might not find any injuries, why do you still think you should have a high suspicion
There
of
could be internal bleeding.
internal injuries?
Internal ability doesn't really show up that readily, not for a little while anyway, so not until you get blood collected.
Right.
And that's where you get the big bruises.
Yeah.
It's also
Everything in motion
difficult to
stays in
pinpoint.
motion.
When you're just like, I got hit, it hurts. It's harder to pinpoint where the exact site of injury might be.
Yeah.
So there's.
You can get referred pain through the transfer of energy from getting smacked. You know, if you get hit, punched in the back, energy transfers through, so you might get pains in your chest. might be kind of like that slightly referred, what we call referred pain. Feel pain differently from where your injury site was. Can often happen with like splenic injuries. So when your spleen gets injured, sometimes you'll get black and blue all up and down your left flank. Will be very painful, but you can also feel pain upwards into your shoulder or even down towards your hip with your spleen, and actually even into the back. So yeah, so blunt force, you want to be very highly suspicious. If anyone gets, smacked with a frying pan across the head,
Probably happened more than we think.
Your back truck is right.
you definitely want to have a high suspicion for those patients with injuries, and they definitely should be
Domestic
watched.
situation? maybe?
Huh?
A possible
Domestic?
domestic situation?
Yeah. That goes back to the scene size up.
Yeah.
So see how I did that?
The way
If you see the
frying
white-
pan.
Especially if it's a cast iron pan, she meant business.
Well, he should have listened the first time, then she wouldn't have to smack him.
True.
All right. Anyone have any questions so far on trauma?
Screw that Revere wear, man. Break out the cast iron.
After the blood test.
All right, so let's jump into nature of the illness. So this is the reason the patient called us. Why are we here? Well, this is the reason why. So this is how we begin. After we've done our scene size up, you got to scan the entire scene. Okay. So we're not just looking at the patient. We're looking around the patient too. So you want to make sure that you're looking at their nightstand if they're in their bedroom. Look at the coffee table, the side tables next to the couch. Look in the kitchen for other clues, especially if they're not able to give you a good history. Look for these helpful clues.
Well, if they're unconscious,
Family members that are on scene, friends that might be there. Look for medication vials. What do you think? Let me ask you guys. What do you think you're going to be looking for at someo's house
And
if
it's
they're
out
unable
of the
to answer?
ordinary.
They're unable to answer. Go ahead.
Anything out of the ordinary.
Anything out of the ordinary?
Medication bottles open.
Yeah.
Or unopened.
Some means that puts them in that state.
Yep.
Any type of any legal narcotic.
Yep.
Needles.
Yeah. Age is definitely going to be taken into that. So needles.
Blood spots
Prescription.
on like counters and stuff when they go hit their head or whatever. If that's
Yeah.
what the
Pipes, whatever.
Alcohol.
I'm
Alcohol.
also looking at the general state, like the condition of the property, the condition of the living quality,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that tells me kind of what to expect. I mean, what is my standard of living may not be their standard of living. So if I think, God, this place is a wreck, something must have happened, and that's just how they live, and I'm making assumptions based off that, that's going to completely change the way that I end up responding.
But 100% right. But you also want to take that into account because the people that might be living if it's wintertime, you're living in someone's in their apartment and there's no heat, and it's freezing cold in there. Well, hypothermia. This patient's probably could be one of the reasons that they're not talking to us and unresponsive.
Propane
is
heaters
being
inside apartments.
hypothermic. Propane, people like propane or kerosene heaters.
Carbon monoxide.
We still see a lot of kerosene heaters in apartments for that extra bit of warmth, and they can
They can't
kick off a
afford-
lot of CO if they're not used right. So good. Information. So we can obtain it from a few different sources. Patient's primary, family members or bystanders if they're there, and then just looking at the scene. So that our observations around the scene will help. We recently had a lady that she eventually was successful. Ended up being a couple of days, but she took a bottle of Tylenol PM. She was 83 years old.
I know this call.
So
I know where you're going.
we, not just the Tylenol, but because of looking around and noticing what was next to her that was on the coffee, she also took 2 bottles of Visine,
Yeah.
the eye drops. So Visine, the eye
Visine.
drops,
That's very, very.
it's very potent. It's very toxic, actually. It can cause a lot of cardiac. Yeah, she drank 2 whole bottles, just a little like 3 fluid ounce bottles.
She'd made comments though that she wanted to go.
Well, yeah, but I'm not going to go fully into it. I'm just
I know,
saying.
yeah, I know.
So I'm just talking about this in the whole. Yeah, it can cause a lot of cardiac arrhythmias. Turns out, but you have to look around for things like this. How did we know she took the whole bottle? Observations.
So what if
She had the whole bottle that was empty. It was, you know how when you go to your own medicine cabinet, you take out your bottle of Tylenol that's been there for a year and a half. What's the bottle look like? It doesn't look like it's brand new right out of the box, right?
Dusty.
It's dusty, it's faded. This was a brand new looking bottle with a box sitting right next to it in the trash. So observations like this help us.
How far can you go looking around? You don't need a warrant, right? They
We,
call.
so we're not, because we're not looking for anything legally, we don't have, there's, as far as I know, there's nothing saying that we can't look around the house, especially if we're looking for medical reasons. Now, if you find something, if you go into someone's bedroom and you find a meth lab,
Get out.
you get out, but you can't tell, in that search, you wouldn't be able to tell the police, I don't believe.
Yes, you can. In the scope of your duties, if you're
Mandatory.
going.
Well, in the terms of a meth lab, yes, because that's a public health crisis or
Right.
whatnot, but
But the
They
same
don't
thing,
follow
the
their
same
door.
thing if you walk into a bedroom and there's a dead body in there. It's the same thing.
But they're doing
The scope of
a
your
drug.
duties allow you to
What is
report
it,
it, and they can
doctor's
go ahead
house?
and find probable cause.
But they're doing like heroin or something, you can't call the cops on them.
Right.
Because it's
I guess I was thinking, should have been thinking more along the lines of like
drug narcotics or whatever.
recreational drugs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can look around. There's nothing saying that we have to have permission. Now, is it a good idea to ask permission from someone if you can?
Well, if he's got a dead
it's a
body in
nice,
the next bedroom, probably not a good idea.
it's kind of a nice thing to do
Okay.
to ask, but there's, as far as I know, there's no statute that limits us to where we can
We're
look.
not gonna go through their drawers, but anything out there that I can look
Right.
at is
It's called
fine.
plain
Right.
view.
Or if they say oh, my medications are up in the cupboard there, like you can go to the cupboard, open it up, and
See
take
what they have.
medications out and see what they have.
Once
You
once
know.
you get permission, or if it's plain view.
Right. So, whoops. So, last bit of scene size up. Questions to ask yourself. How many patients do I have? Do I have 1, 3, 5, 10, 12, 25? How many do I have? And once you answer that question, do the resources that I currently possess here on scene enough to take care of these patients? If the answer is no, you want to call for more.
Right.
So, and try to anticipate the maximum number of patients. Try to bring, if you're on your way to an accident and dispatch comes back and reports, hey, there's 4 patients and there's only 1 truck going, start your help early. Get your help coming. You can always stop them. If you get there and realize, 3 of you are sign off, we're only transporting 1. Okay, stop mutual aid. We got this. We're gonna sign them off and transport the 1. So get your help coming early. Try to anticipate it. Try to listen to if fire beats there, or if there's any first responders that happen to be driving across. Try to listen to the radio and get that info. So scene size up. This is the first part of our assessment. When we go to an accident, when we go to a chest pain patient, scene size up something we're doing. We're taking a look around. We're taking a look at the house. Is it well kept? Is there hazards? Is it icy? Are there wires hanging down because wind blew them over? Are there trees down in front? All that stuff's part of scene size up, especially even in the EMS. So this is what helps determine are there threats to us? Are there threats to other people? Do we need more help? How many patients do we have? These are all questions that we want to ask ourselves with our scene sizing. This is before we haven't talked about getting to the patient yet. We're just determining why we're here. Why are we here? Is it injury, illness, both? And then take into account your patients, what kind of help you need, what kind of resources you have. And then also another big thing, your standard precautions. Make sure you protect yourself. Patients don't have to tell you if they have AIDS. Believe it or not, they do not have to. Even if you ask them for their past medical history, they don't have to tell you stuff like that. They are not under any legal obligation to. That's why you should treat every patient that their blood, their sticky stuff does not belong on your skin.
Everybody's
So
infected.
everybody is infected.
Even if you
So-
get stuck, if you get stuck at that point, then does that?
You mean like stuck with one of their needles and whatnot?
Because that's gonna go as far as the treatment goes.
I think they have to request one, but the patient can still.
I guess
say
they probably
no.
could.
Yeah,
So they have to treat it as if you,
yeah. You'd be undergoing a lot of tests.
yeah,
So
and medicate, yeah.
in general, just make sure you take your proper PPE, your proper PSI, and wear your gloves, wear your mask, wear your eye protection for the calls that are appropriate. Alright, let's answer this one. Let's do a little critical thinking. You're called to the scene of a shooting at a fast food restaurant. En route, you plan your scene size-up strategy. What actions do you anticipate taking on arrival?
Make sure you got like the mild sauce.
You're not gonna show up until you make sure police or somebody.
Okay, yep,
Please
absolutely.
let me say.
Post up and
Determine
you're undercover.
patients.
Post up undercover.
Yeah, you're gonna behind a, park the ambulance by a wall, wherever they, if they haven't already directed you,
Yeah.
in case there's shots coming out.
Yep.
They can determine how many patients.
How many patients?
Body armor.
Body armor. Yep. Believe it or not, we carry body armor on all our trucks here.
Some people even
So
wear
it's
them.
it's too hot for them to wear it now.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. Most services are some services are carrying body armor. It's just realities of the work now, unfortunately. What else do you think you might take?
All kinds of trauma gear and get ready.
Get stuff ready.
It's gonna
Yeah.
be
Pile it on
something.
top of the stretcher. Get it ready to bring with you.
Yeah.
I mean, eventually you're gonna bring the ambulance up to the scene, but
Possible MCI tags.
yeah. How many patients do we have? You kinda
Calling
go
for
say-
backup, they're calling for more.
Yeah,
EMS.
putting people on standby.
Yeah.
Good. Cool. That's the end of scene size up. Any questions on that?
It's just pay attention when you're coming up on a scene.
One thing I didn't see in the
Fire out.
patient assessment sheets.
Yep.
Not every call was initiated by the patient, so at what point do we worry about permission to treat?
I mean, you're gonna know right off. So you're talking about like when family members call for.
Well,
For their
yeah,
family members.
somebody, or maybe the neighbors, or who have, I mean, like, do you explicitly go in and say, is it okay for me to do things? Or do you just assume it is unless they tell you to stop?
So I would never assume that it's okay. I would start with the, treat it like a conversation if they ask you like, why are you here? Like, treat it with a, what are your neighbors? They thought they saw you fall, so they called 911 to come check up on you.
What if it's a domestic
So-
situation?
Those are always difficult. PD. If you think there's a domestic issue going on at hand,
Say like
Have
the
someone
girlfriend called, but then decided
Call the
just
PD.
before we got here that she was like, oh, I don't want to, it's just gonna be more harm than good, I'm just gonna get it.
call the PD. That's not our. If you have any inkling of domestic abuse or domestic violence,
I totally report it.
yeah, you still back out, call the police. It's not our job to determine. She may not want to go to the hospital. She may not want to do anything about it, but you still need to bring the police into the matter. If you let that go, there could be all sorts of legal ramifications if something happens to that person. So yeah, always bring cops in. If there's any inkling of you think this is domestic violence, call the cops.
That point of view had a pretty good,
Yes, the one about the lady in there. Yeah, that was a very good read.
yeah.
So
Wasn't it also one of the quiz questions, if you're on scene, you realize that it's domestic, you have to get off scene until PD gets there?
it's a good idea. Yeah. If there's
Yeah.
any inkling if the patient doesn't want to, if you get there and they're like, oh no, I changed my mind, everything's fine, and you have this inkling that was domestic violence or domestic abuse, back out. Have your partner back out first, a little bit ahead of you if you need to, so you can wrap up saying, okay, no problem, But always keep your eyes in the back of your head open on things like that. Get back to your truck, pull away from the scene, call PD, wait for them to come in and secure the scene. Anytime there's if there's any semblance of violence, whether it's domestic abuse or just even violence towards you and aggression towards you, back out, bring the cops in. Derek could tell you a story about that happened just last year. About they were called for I forget what the actual initial call was, but when they got there, they went in. The mother had called on the call 911 on this. When they got in there, the guy started screaming at them, aggressively approaching them, and they backed out of the house, and the dude continued to come after them down the driveway. They were actually backing up in the driveway. He was marching down the driveway after them. So if that's the case, back out, try not to clear. Try not to get into a physical altercation if you can't. Obviously, if you do get into a physical altercation, you are allowed to defend yourself with whatever physical means you can. But in this case, they had to back away from the scene and wait for VSP to come in and basically calm the situation down. Which he calmed down, and then I came in and we were talking to him fine, and then he decided to try to leg sweep a VSP trooper.
Not a good
And
one.
yeah, he grabbed one by the pant leg and tried to leg sweep the other one, and 4 of them went.
Nope.
And then he went night night. And had a nice calm ride to the hospital. But anyway, things like that happen. So if there's any aggression, back out, bring the police in. And don't be afraid to leave the scene in that case. There's not going to be a case of abandonment in these cases, because you are protecting yourself. You can't help anybody if you get harmed in the process. So.
Like I said, be same with like an animal going after you. It doesn't need to be just a person. Like if
True,
a dog's
yeah.
aggressive, you can call VSP or somebody. to come
We
in.
typically always ask people to put their dogs in another room.
But if they're not capable of doing that, you're not that somebody, because some dogs, they look good, nice, and then you go touch your owner, and then they completely different type of
So
animal.
if they're unable to, I would ask them to put them on a leash and maintain a very tight hold on them.
What if
Keep
the
them from-
patient's unresponsive when you get there, like they called and then they came unresponsive and then they're gone?
Call
Since
animal
it's
control,
you as-
PD and animal control.
I mean, use your head on that one. I mean, I can't give you the answers to every scene, so you're gonna have to kind of play everything by ear a little bit in some cases. But do what you think is best. If you feel like the scene is unsafe, back away and wait for animal control or police to come by.
Check what's in the refrigerator,
Yeah.
throw
Grab a
some
granola bar out of your
room,
pocket.
close it.
Yeah, I mean, you can always
Go to
use
the
treats if you
fridge
see them
and get
lying
a
around. But if you are in any scene and it's an animal or person and you feel threatened and you feel like it's not safe, you back out, call the police, bring PD in. There's no abandonment issues or neglect on these cases. It is strictly a safety issue at this point, and that is okay. Okay. Any other questions? All right, on to the primary assessment. Whoa, I did that earlier. I don't know why it's like blacking out for some reason in this chapter. All right, primary assessment. So the primary assessment is going to be after our scene size up, this is the next thing we do. And this is basically identify life threats on patients. Is there a problem with their ABCs? So is there a problem with their airway, their breathing, or their circulation? If there's a problem with one of these things, we do not move on until we fix and address the problems with that particular issue. If you have an airway issue, you treat the airway issue first. If there's a circulation issue, like they're splurting blood, fix the problem, then move on. So obviously patient's condition can vary this a little bit. How many EMTs are also on scene? Sometimes we do things multiple different ways. Sometimes multiple things happen at once there's multiple people on scene. But you basically prioritize ABCs. So the sequence of ABCs does flip around under one circumstance, and that's cardiac arrest. So if your patient's lifeless with no pulse, no breathing, you actually do CAB, circulation, airway, breathing. So you're checking for a pulse. If there's no pulse, you start CPR. You can breathe with a pulse. If you don't have a pulse, you're not doing anything. So if they're not breathing and they don't have a pulse, you don't need to bother to check the airway if they're breathing. If there's no pulse, they're not breathing. You can't breathe without a pulse. So if they don't have a pulse, you start CPR. So this is kind of your only time that your sequence will vary, like a hard vary. You get some more flexible variations with like trauma patients. Obviously, if I walked up to Felicia and I saw her arm was like gushing blood, I'm not going to care about her A and B right off the bat. I'm just going to put a tourniquet on her arm, stop the bleeding, and then go to A and B. So there's some flexible changes to it, but for the most part, the only hard change in the sequence is cardiac arrest. So when we're looking at our airway, how do we tell if a patient's airway is patent?
Well, you can see the breathing to start.
Yeah.
But then you can do cap refill.
Not for breathing.
Color of the skin.
Color of the skin, a little bit.
Hearing wheezing or anything like that?
Wheezing, yeah. We're listening, at this point we're listening for like audible sounds. Are they gurgling? Is there vomit? That's kind of in there. Are they spitting stuff out? Usually if someone's sitting there talking, they have a patent airway. If they're breathing, they typically have a patent airway if they're not giving you that choking sign. So we're looking for some sort of blockage to an airway. That's kind of what that's our assessment for airway. Whatever sort of blockage might be there. A sanguinating bleeding has to be stopped immediately. And sanguinating, for those you don't know, that means blood, like bleeding to the point of being able to bleed all your blood out of your body. So if you had an arterial bleed, you stop that first immediately. Breathing and circulation are obviously vital. So we want to have good breathing, and we want to have adequate breathing. So we want a good rate, 12 to 20 times a minute, and we want good volume. So you want that nice good breath. We don't want to see someone breathing 36 times a minute. We don't want to see somebody breathing 5 times a minute. So we're looking for that good breathing, that in and out. What are some signs? So when we say signs and symptoms, when I say signs are what we see. Symptoms are what the patient tells you they're feeling. For breathing, what do you think you're going to see that's going to tell you somebody's having trouble breathing?
What
Dominic?
If the chest is going up and down.
Chest up and down. Okay.
Clutching the chest.
Clutching at the chest. Were you going to say something?
I was going to say the
Muscle
muscles they're
neck.
using to breathe, whether it's their diaphragm or their shoulders, if you see them start to move this area, they're not breathing well.
Yep. Accessory muscle use.
Facial color.
Facial color. Yep. Cyanosis, pale. You can also be pale gray.
You see them like heavy breathing, like breathing fast.
Yep. Speed at which they're breathing.
Noise.
How this position? Tripod position. This typically is a position that you'll see. They'll either be maybe down like this, or they could be up on the table. So that leaning forward, that it helps them keep that airway, keep those breathing, your bronchioles open. Helps to give them that feeling of, you'll see them kind of leaning forward, or that straight up and that straight, and you'll still see them working, like they will be working to breathe. Good. So intermediate interventions such as bleeding control or CPR, not required, are shift to an important but less urgent mode. So this is where, okay, you've got a good airway, you're breathing normally, you're not bleeding from anywhere that I can see. Perfect. Okay, now we're going to move on to, okay, what's truly bothering you? You got chest pain? Okay, cool. Let's take on chest pain. Let's go down that rabbit hole of questions and answers. So these are our immediate life threats. Without ABCs, there is no life. So when we're doing our primary assessment, it has these 6 things. General impression. Anyone know what your general impression is?
Just what you see when you first get there.
Yeah. When you walk in that door or walk into the living room for the first time, it's what you initially see on that patient. What do they look like? Do they look lethargic? Do they look like they're having a hard time breathing? Do they look pale? Do they look flushed? What do they look like to you? What's the general state of the patient? That's all it is, just a general state. Then we're going to assess their mental status. We assess their mental status using a mnemonic called AVPU. AVPU. Alert, verbal, painful, unresponsive. So, alert is, hey Felicia, how are you doing today?
Just fine.
Perfect. You know what day it is?
I do.
Perfect. So, if they're answering questions, so once you determine that they're answering questions back to you, they're alert. So you want to check 3 things. You want to check, this is where we get into, you might have heard conscious alert oriented times 2, 3, 4, 1. So this is where we determine that. So then you would ask the patient, what day is it?
It's Monday.
Okay. Who are you? Can you give me your full name?
Yeah, my name is Felicia Leffler.
Cool. And where do you live?
I live in Enosburg.
Perfect. So that's what person, place, time. Those are the 3 big ones you're looking for. Some people will do some people will add a 4th one as to an event.
Like, do
So-
you know who the president is?
President.
Oh, then, or even like, can they remember what's going on? Like, can you tell me what's bothering you today?
What just happened?
Usually, isn't it, do you know where you are right now? Is what I've always heard asked. Like,
You can, yes.
any concussion I've ever had, anytime I've ever fallen sports related, is who are you? What day is it? Do you know where you are?
Yes. That's usually the way we phrase it. Sometimes with patients, you might have to vary it up, especially with some of our elderly patients that might have dementia. They might know that I live on Nason Street, but they might not remember what house number they are, or so sometimes, usually yes, we want to know specifically where they are at that point in time. Some patients we gotta play a little bit of a game with them because that's just where their mental status is, and you verify that through family and friends that might be on scene. So good. So if they answer those, they're alert times 3 or times 2, whatever they answer to. If they're not, if you have someone that's lethargic and they appear to be sleeping, and I have to go, Liz, and have to verbally tell them to get her to open her eyes and like look at me and respond to me, that would be verbal responsiveness. It takes some sort of verbal stimuli to rouse the patient to pay attention to you and answer your questions. Painful stimuli, which is the next step, is if they don't answer to basic voice and then verbal commands, you have to do painful stimuli. There's several different ones. You can pinch the nail beds with take a pen, pinch the nail beds with it. You can pinch the earlobes. Or the common one, you can do a sternal rub. Don't be gentle when you do this. This is not just a soft rub on the chest. This is a bear down with your knuckles and give them a rub hard on the chest. If you get a response out of them, they moan, groan, maybe they might open their eyes at you.
It's better than nothing.
That would be considered painfully responsive. If they do not respond to pain, they are unresponsive. Any questions on that?
When my grandfather was in the hospital, they pinched right here
Yep.
to get him to respond.
Yeah, that's another place they'll do too. I had a doc actually saw a doc one day shove a tongue depressor down someone's throat to get them to like gag to send them out of
That's
it.
a choice.
Yeah. That was the whole, that was an
That
interesting
seems
one.
like a real good way to get covered in vomit.
Well, snap the guy out of doing whatever was going on with him. I don't remember exactly. I think it was thought it was a brain bleed, but it ended up being it's like a psych issue. I don't remember the specific term he used, but it was interesting. All right, so then after we assess the mental status, we assess the airway. How do we assess an airway on an unresponsive patient?
Check.
Look, listen, and feel.
Look, listen, and feel. But what's the technique we use? Or maybe they might have not taught. This might have not been in the chapter. This is where we're going to get into our head tilt chin lifts. So we're going to open that airway up. We're going to listen, make sure that we're going to look in there and make sure we can't see anything as best we can.
Yeah, they're not sticking their fingers down there.
No, you do not stick your finger in anyone's throat.
They're not sweeping.
That's how you get.
That's what we have other things to reach in and grab shit out with now.
Yeah.
Too many people have got their fingers bitten off.
Yeah.
And then you don't have a finger and they're choking on it. So
I think the only exception still to that is like infants with choking habits.
Yeah.
So, checking an airway. After we assess the airway, we assess the breathing. We kind of talked about how we look at that. We're looking at the rate that how fast they're breathing. We're looking at how they're sitting. We're looking at the color of their face, their lips particularly. That's where you're going to see cyanosis first, is around the lips. Some older patients with like COPD and whatnot, they may have like purple or blue type fingers tips. That can be sometimes normal for them depending on their respiratory status and how advanced their COPD or congestive heart failure might be. After breathing, assess the circulation. How do we assess circulation? Check their pulse. We just look over them really quickly, whether hey, you got any blood anywhere on you? Is there blood leading up to the couch where you're sitting? So we're checking that. How do we check kids for circulation, like infants? Yeah, you can use the brachial pulse. What's another way?
With the
Cap refill. Capillary refill on kids. So you check here, check the nail bed.
Red
2
and
seconds,
white.
yeah.
Yeah. Pinch the nail bed till it turns white, and then it should turn pink again within 2 seconds. In under 2 seconds. Anything more than 2 seconds, they have poor perfusion. So that's how we're assessing our circulation. And then we're determining, at this point in time, we're determining our priority of the patient. Priority of the patient is this patient a life threat, needs to go to the hospital right now? Yes or no?
For
If
the
you-
our EMT exam, heads up, it'll always be.
Yes, it'll always be a priority patient on your national registry.
1, 2, 3.
So usually, well, no, they don't usually assign it, but it'll be more of a
High priority.
high priority patient. So this is the way I think they term it. So if you you have a bad airway, bad breathing, bad circulation, or bad mental status, you have a high priority patient. So our general impression, kind of like we already talked about, we're not just assessing what the patient looks like initially, we're also looking at the surrounding location. Take the patient's chief complaint, look at his appearance, determine the severity. We'll be going over more of this in here with some questions in the next presentation on how to determine severity of chest pain, breathing patients. We'll give you some mnemonics and we'll start talking about questioning. And then we want to help set up, this is also going to help set up priority for our care and transport. So, general impression, what do you guys think? Give me your general impression of her. Just walked up to her.
She fell down, skinned her
Fell.
knee.
Okay?
Red.
Yeah, head.
Red, yeah.
What do you think happened?
Probably
Lost
what-
control
what's your-
of her roller skates.
I'd say that's a pretty good guess. Looks like she gushed up her knee pretty good. It's a
Yeah,
lot of
she
blood
did.
from the knee there. Anything else you want to be kind of cognizant of with
Head injury.
Concussion.
I heard her out.
concussion? But what about just, not necessarily her, but
I'm
just
not
look around at the
seeing
picture.
Parents around.
Yeah.
That's a concern.
She's alone.
Let's say the parents are just off
She's
camera.
leaning forward a little bit.
I'd say that crack is the
Flower.
reason she fell.
Hey, cool. Yeah, look at the thing. Look at the crack there. Gives you clues on how she might have fallen. Did she come over? Did she take a tumble? Did she hit and go back?
Cheap roller skates.
That's probably
She
what it
doesn't
is.
look
Really?
like she's in a ton of pain.
Look like something you want to wear in a
She doesn't look like she's too.
freaking carpet.
And Albert Central with the Monday night test on for
So yeah, so good.
Opened up.
So yeah, so your general impression is literally just generally what's going on. Looking at the area, good pickup on the crack in the sidewalk that could have been what caused her to fall. So you want to keep an idea on this stuff. Not wearing a helmet, or is the helmet off to the side somewhere? But in this case, yeah, no helmet. So yeah, that's what our general impression is. We're also going to start looking at. This is the point in the time we're also going to start looking at stabilization of the spine, especially for trauma patients. We still do take manual stabilization anytime that you might think that there's a mechanism of injury to cause any sort of neck, cervical spine, or spine injury. So, taking manual stabilization at this point in time could happen. We also might begin spinal motion restriction. This is the new, because we don't backboard anybody anymore. Spinal immobilization does not exist anymore. It's gone. It's been taken and punted. Should have been done 30 years ago. But we do not do that anymore. We do spinal motion restriction. Patients will splint themselves. They're not going to do anything to cause themselves some harm. So if you tell a patient to remain still, to lay on the stretcher, don't move their head or neck, and just answer the questions, they will do that. They are not going to cause themselves to. They're not going to look at you if it causes them pain to do so. They're going to do what's going to cause them the least amount of pain. So that's what we call spinal motion restriction. When we get into trauma and spinal injuries, we're going to go through this. We're going to go through the protocol. We're going to go through all of this with that. But just in mind, when it comes to trauma patients, taking some sort of manual stabilization and decision on the spinal takes place in your primary assessment.
You still see color?
We just still use C-collars, yeah. But that's about the extent of it. So, and you're going to continue this throughout the entire physical examination unless during your physical exam you prove that there's no issues. And like I said, we're going to go through the whole assessment process when we get to spinal injuries.
If we don't put them on a backboard at all, like
I got a backboard.
Like, what if it's like a, I don't know, like a car accident, we need to get them out, we just.
Where you use a backboard to get them out?
Yeah.
You take them off the backboard and get them to the stretcher.
That's true.
There are some provisions that still, if the patient's hurt to the point where taking the time to take the backboard out from them is not worth the time, you can keep them on the back. You're not securing them and spinal immobilizing them anymore. So they don't get the head blocks, they don't get the head straps, they don't get any of that stuff. So.
That's occupation anxiety.
Takes too long.
It is. What? Backwards?
Being immobilized?
Yeah, it sucks.
Terrifying.
It was actually, they're finding it doing more harm than good.
I'm sure it did.
So, so the look test. So this is getting a feeling about patient's condition just from environmental observations as well as a first look. Yeah, don't remind me, I gotta work after this. They're already out on a call, so I'm just gonna let that run for a second. Ring that time before reaching out on the radio.
So this is coming from dispatch in
I think Katie's,
St. Albans.
Okay, there you go.
I think Katie's working.
No, we have another crew. They're just out on the air right now, so but they always call here first. So anyway, so the look test. So this is just basically when you look at them, you get a general feeling of it by taking a look at environmental observations, whether that's, hey, they're just running a marathon. It's 110 degrees out. Now I'm looking at a patient that's unresponsive and pale on the ground. It's not sweating. It's bad. I know what's going on. You're burning up. Let's cool you down. So that's what the look test is. It's a very quick, down and dirty, like, this is what's going on, this is what's around me, that's what the patient looks like, that's where we're headed first. Once you get them into the truck or get them into an area where you can start assessing them more, that's when you start talking, that's when you start branching out, looking for other reasons. So, these patients, this look test identifies patients who might be critical, they might appear lifeless. It might be just when you walk into a house, the old man that just called because he wasn't feeling good is now on the ground and unresponsive. He looks unresponsive. So therefore we're going to treat him unresponsive. He looks dead. So we're going to start resuscitation right off the bat until we can prove otherwise. And it might be just something as simple as soon as you feel for a pulse. Oh, he still has a pulse. Great. Cool. Let's figure out why we breathe for him. So this is what the look test is. There's some sort of obvious mental status, there's some sort of obvious issue going on. So these are obvious head trauma, chest, abdomen, so these are obviously tripod position. We talked about that with difficulty breathing patients. Levine's sign, which I actually had to look this up. I didn't know what it was. When I read it, I'm like, what's Levine's sign? I actually have never heard of it. It's the classic heart attack.
Oh, okay.
Clenched fist to the chest. I actually didn't know it had a specific name. So when I read that, I'm like, Levine's sign, what the heck is that? Thank you, Google. I looked it up, and yeah, so that's that classic chest, fist to the chest, chest pain.
It was like the old Sanford and Son, you know?
Yep.
Elizabeth.
Yep. So it's look for that. That's an obvious sign that someone's in obvious distress.
I dated myself, I'm sorry.
So sometimes you might get a specific description of the chief complaint. My belly hurts. Sometimes you're gonna get, I just don't feel well. I hate that, I don't feel well. Because that means you gotta go down every branch until you start pinpointing things. I hate it. At least they can do is give me something abdominal pain, so at least we can start somewhere. Rather
Doesn't feel good.
Huh?
What doesn't feel good?
Yeah. So you might get vague, you might get specific. So this is where we're going to start kind of forming an impression of the patient. We're going to look at what their age is, sex is, the position that they're in. Is it tripod, or are they sitting back and nice and relaxed? Do they not look like they're in any distress at all? Listen to their breathing. You hear moaning, snoring, gurgling. You will actually hear gurgling. If someone has enough fluid built up in their lungs, it will literally sound like somebody blowing bubbles in a straw. So it's you might hear that. You also might hear wheezing. Sometimes asthmatics will have, you can hear wheezing from across the room if it's a bad enough asthma attack. So you want to listen for these things, these types of things. Moaning while they're breathing. Even though they might be talking to you, they might not realize they're doing it due to one reason or another. Smell. Their fumes, urine, feces, vomitus, decay. Most urine smells you're going to find are going to be cat. Just because cats tend to piss everywhere and it's gross, and it will stay with you. But these are smells you want to know because this will go back to telling you the condition that the patient's living in. Nobody should be living in that kind of condition. And cats believe it or not, can cause problems with the human on the human side of things with infections or scratches and causing sepsis and other things.
Cat scratch fever was a thing.
It is.
The smell of mold.
Yep.
Thank you, Ted.
Smell of mold has pretty distinct. Vomitus and feces have a pretty distinct smell. The first time you ever smell a lower GI bleed will be the last time you ever will be. You'll never forget it. You'll never forget the smell of a lower GI bleed. Like I can't even describe it to you. It's so horrible.
I've
But
done
you
some
will-
pretty nasty decon
Yeah.
cases.
So
That's nasty.
these things will clue you into things that are going on with the patient. So we went over ASPU. When you do document this, when you document someone that's alert, you want to document what they're orientated to. So if someone's conscious alert oriented times 1, what are they oriented to? Person, place, or time. I usually put it in like little brackets on in my report. I'll write CAO times 1 and then in brackets put person. All right, order of our primary assessment will depend on the patient's condition. Typically will be airway, breathing, circulation.
Can you
So-
go back to APCO for 2 seconds?
Yeah, sure.
It's actually on page 321.
I can leave it up if you guys want to write it down.
No, it's right here. You're good.
You're not going to forget this because we're going to drill this into your head through when we get to start doing assessment, like actually doing like physical assessments. Good? All right, cool. Oops, wait a minute. There we go. So ABCs, we're identifying and correcting the life threats. Like we said, if they're bleeding, stop the bleeding. If it's insanguinating bleeding, if someone's got a small cut because they decided to cut their arm a little bit with a razor blade, taking just a little bit of gauze to it and like cleaning them up while you're talking to them is okay. Like you don't need to stop everything to treat that. We're talking about like arterial bleeding, massive bleeding that could lead to death. That's the type of bleeding we're talking about. Other breathing, rapid breathing, slow breathing, we need to correct those issues. How do we correct slow breathing?
BVM.
BVM, we breathe for them. We give them how do we breathe? How do we fix it if they're breathing fast?
Nothing, you wait
Paper
for
bag.
BVM.
BVM?
Support their ventilations. Let them breathe it, but give them extra volume. Every 5 to 6 seconds, give them an extra squeeze, give them some extra volume. Yes, we breathe for people that breathe too fast also. So identify our correct list, and then we're going to gather the information that's going to help us later on in the assessment. So, general impression here. What's everybody's what would you say here?
Unresponsive. Doesn't look like he's breathing. Probably cardiac.
Yep. So we're looking for signs of life, scan the chest, like you said, look for signs of breathing. Gasping breaths is not breathing. So someone that goes, that is not breathing. Those are called, excuse me, I just scratch my throat doing that. Those are what we call agonal breaths. And they're not sustainable to life. So that is not considered breathing. If someone's doing that, you need to start ventilating them. Yep, check for a pulse. If it's there, move on to the next portion, fix whatever else for ABCs that you need to, and then move on to others, treatment. If there's no pulse, we're starting CPR.
She has AED.
Huh?
So she has AED in her hand, so.
Yep. So probably what?
Cardiac
arrest. All right, airway. If the patient's alert and talking clearly or crying loudly in the terms of a kid, the airway is open. If the airway is not opened or endangered, take measures to open it and clear any blockages. So the two ways that we do that, I don't think there is yet. Two ways we do that is non-trauma patients get the head tilt chin lift. So that's when you take them by the chin, take them by the forehead or the back of the head, and you're going to basically tip their head back. So it opens the airway. It straightens the airway out so you see it. We'll have plenty of time to practice this. The other one that you can't really practice, you can practice it on live, people. If you're going to do it, I highly recommend doing this to your wife or your husband or boyfriend while they're sleeping. Is the jaw thrust maneuver. So,
great ideas, don't you?
hey, what kind of instructor would I be if I'm not?
Couch.
So it's hard to show, but basically what you're going to do is you're going to reach in right under here into their jaw, underneath the jawbone here, and you're like legit going to lift their jaw up.
That's teal.
Do we have the CPR dummies that do that here?
I don't have any here right now, but you literally like pick their jaw up. So you're basically what you're doing is you're lifting the jaw, but you're pulling the tongue up. So the tongue comes up off the airway. That's the point of the jaw thrust. So those are two ways. Again, we'll practice these with the dummies. If you want to get some practice in, you can look it up and try it on your significant other while they're sleeping. Just be prepared for some blunt force trauma afterwards.
Just push on that divorce right on you.
Yeah. Situations calling for breathing assistance include respiratory arrest with a pulse. People can stop breathing, still be having a pulse. Happens. Is not alert but has inadequate breathing. Some level of alertness but inadequate breathing. And has adequate breathing but signs of suggesting respiratory distress or hypoxia. So you can be breathing adequately but still in distress.
Chest pain, arm goes numb type thing, but they're still breathing fine, right?
Well, I mean, chest pain, arm going numb is typically going to be your chest pain, cardiac problems. These are going to be probably your early COPDers, your early asthma patients. They're just getting into an early asthma attack or an early exacerbation of COPD. So they might have some distress, so they might be a little on the tachypnic side. So remember our medical terminology, tachy means fast. So tachypnic means fast breathing. So they might be at that 22 to 24, 26 time. They might have a little bit of a hypoxia, so their oxygen sat might be 84, 86%, something like that. So they haven't quite reached the point of being not alert. They're still alert, and there's still some adequate breathing going on, but you need to do something before. You need to do something then before it turns into the not alert or had some alertness with inadequate breathing. Circulation. So we're assessing our skin, checking our circulation. Normal skin is pink, warm, and dry. Shocky skin is pale, cool, and pale and clammy, which clammy is just cool and moist skin. Diaphoresis is something that you might see pale, cool, and diaphoretic is another way you might see it. You might see these with chest pain patients. Typically will be pale, cool, and diaphoretic. Diaphoresis is just excessive sweating. They look like they just ran a marathon kind of sweat. Like it's pouring off, like you can see it on their face. So when we check our pulse, we don't check, everyone in here got their CPR cards? Everyone had CPR? You haven't had yours? We are doing a CPR class within this class, so if you haven't got it, you will get CPR.
You just need to re-up.
Yeah, either way, whether you've never had it or need to re-up, that's pretty much what it'll be. So when we check our pulse, we don't check for any longer than 10 seconds. Okay? We are considered experts at it. As EMS providers, we are experts at finding pulses. If you can't find it in 10 seconds, it's not there. And it's okay. Even if it's there and you can't feel it and it's so weak and thready that you can't feel it, CPR is not going to hurt this person. So, remember when we were talking about vital signs a couple of classes ago, I talked about once you feel enough pulses, you'll start to get to the point of that's fast, that's slow, that's normal. So that's really, when we check our circulation, that's all we're looking for. We're not really looking for a specific number at that time. All I want to know is, does it feel normal? Does it feel nice and strong, regular, and normal limits? So does it feel like it's between 60 and 100? Or does it feel like, ooh, 1, 2, 3, oh, that's slow. That's what I want to know. Or is it, ooh, that's really fast. That's like, wow, that's fast. That's what I want to know. That's the kind of reaction that you should get out of the circulation. Ooh, that's slow. Ooh, that's fast. Oh, that feels
They
normal.
call that Freddy or something like that?
Thready is like a weak pulse.
Weak?
Yeah. And then obviously we're checking and controlling severe bleeding. Determine our priority. So this is where we need to treat any life-threatening ABC problem. As soon as it comes up, as soon as you find it, you treat it. Stable patients, a patient has to have vital signs that are in normal ranges or just slightly abnormal to be considered stable. Anything else is any threat to airway, breathing, circulation, either actual or imminent, makes this patient unstable. Anytime there's an issue with the ABCs, it's an unstable patient. So, this is the same guy on the couch. Obviously, he didn't have a pulse. Begin your CPR compressions. While your partner readies the AV. So, it's just a high priority patient, low priority patient. High priority, yeah. Are we moving him though?
No.
Yeah.
When are you moving him?
When he's stable.
Stable or
When you have
After-
some kind of pulse, when you have some kind
Yeah.
of something,
Several rounds.
say
Or
stable.
unless the
Get
doctor,
it back.
You're not moving him until you get a pulse back, basically.
if you get one.
If you get
don't
one.
get one, you have to call.
If you don't get one, you
You still
call a
got-
doc.
Don't you still resuscitate until
20
you can't
minutes.
determine
Is it
death?
20 minutes?
20 minutes.
So you can't determine death.
Well,
We'll go through all of it. Well, there's yes and no. You're doing it with med control. You're after 20 minutes of, so if you get no shocks for 20 minutes and you do CPR for 20 minutes and there's no shocks that have been given, you basically continue CPR, you get on the phone with the doctors, you explain the situation, they'll ask some questions, you answer those questions, and they will either tell you stop or transport. Most likely if you have no shocks for 20 minutes, they're going to tell you to stop. At that point, you stop. You ask the doc for a time of death, they will give it to you, you give that to the police. Because they will be doing an untimely.
I mean, East Coast.
Yeah.
So they're not
Or
gonna be
Rockton.
transporting at all, they're just
Nope.
gonna be calling the morgue.
30 minutes
No.
for him to show
They-
up.
We don't
I
do not
remember.
transport cardiac arrests anymore unless we get pulses back or there's extenuating circumstances that make the scene unsafe. Kids are an exception, even though the exception should not exist.
When you say kids, what age?
Understand.
Under puberty.
Under puberty.
That's more like an emotional thing, isn't it?
It's an emotional thing, but the science behind it all is EMS does, for cardiac arrest, EMS does everything the ER does. They don't have any extra tools that we don't have in the field. At the EMT level, obviously they do, but if you're also going to be calling for help in these situations, so typically an ALS provider will show up. Kids should be treated the same way. We do our best work when we're on scene, when we're not moving the patient. Ever moved a cardiac arrest patient? Guess what? CPR never happens while you're moving them.
Nope.
And if you have to move them over any sort of ground, it takes ages to regain what you already did inside that house doing CPR there. As soon as you stop CPR, you lose all pressure inside. And it can take a couple of rounds to get back up to pressure to start perfusing everything. Kids should be treated the same way. However, nobody wants to see a dead kid. Nobody wants to be the one to say the kid's dead. But we do our best work when we're not moving. So it's a paradigm shift. There's a lot of ER docs that are supportive of EMS that are trying to shift that paradigm to say that stay and play.
You guys got a Lucas device?
So no.
No.
Hospital does.
I know every year's go.
They're good. I mean, they help free up hands. For those that don't know, Lucas devices are the mechanical CPR.
the ones Canada pulled out of their ambulances because they were saving too many people.
Huh?
The one Canada pulled out of their ambulances because they were saving too many people.
Really? I didn't hear that. I'm not surprised.
They pulled them because it was saving them, but the quality of life was in there, and it was very, very, very expensive. It was tying up beds to try and like resuscitate them all the way to where they could discharge. And it was just saving them long enough getting them to the hospital, and they'd die there. It was expensive, so they pulled them.
Okay.
Oh, you got a little.
I could make some comments right now, but I'm not going to.
There's that.
Anyway, so
Socialized medicine.
anyway, so let's go back to determining priority. We kind of got off track there a little bit.
Sorry.
It's okay. There are many times when it's not crystal clear what the patient's problem is going to be. That's okay. You don't know what's going on with the patient. It's okay. There's so many possible diagnoses out there for us to figure out. Some of them are possible for us to figure out. Some are just like, hey, I can't figure out what it is. I think it might be this, but there ain't no way to prove it until you see a doctor. So it's okay not to know, not to have a specific thing. Just supportive care is okay for patients. Patients' priorities can change. You can have a perfectly stable patient, and then you turn around and that patient's completely unstable. It happens. Their priorities change. You can go from low priority to high priority in the snap of a finger. It happens. So that's why we always reassess. We always reassess. We come back. After we do our primary assessment and continue on to other assessments, we're coming back to the top. We're coming right back to ABCs. We are reassessing everything again. When you're in the truck and you're with a patient, it's a constant cycle. You're constantly reassessing everything you've already done, coming up with new questions or a new thought process on what might be causing the issue. It's constantly coming back. It's a constant circle. So we're initiating priority transports with the life-threatening problem, can't be controlled, or it threatens to recur. If you fix the problem, but that problem starts to kind of come back, and that's a high priority, you want to get going, treat the problem as best you can, and get going. If the patient starts to lose level of responsiveness, so if they're alert and oriented times 3 and they all of a sudden are verbally and then painfully, this is another, change in status, and we want to get them to the hospital as fast as we can. You're going to continue your assessment and your care en route. You're going to do everything in the back of the ambulance at this point. So, why must you continue to reevaluate the primary assessment?
So you're
Just
either
trying to,
getting better or getting worse.
is what you're doing helping?
Yeah, if what you're doing is helping. Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? Are you
There's a
wrong?
trend.
Yeah, see if there's a trend. There's no trend. Basically, the biggest thing is things change. Patients change. They get better, they get worse. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just stay nice and stable the whole way. Those are the ones that you like. But yeah.
Priority 3s.
Well, yeah, you don't want patients crashing on you. Trust me, it's not fun. You want patients to have nice, smooth rides to the hospital so you can deliver them there, and then it's the hospital's problem. So how might normal findings in a primary assessment differ for a child?
They can't
Their vitals,
articulate,
yeah.
Yeah, children typically can't articulate what's going on.
or they over-exaggerate. Or,
Yeah.
it depends. I mean, it's like, you're not gonna get that
That straight answer.
that
Or they're
life
scared of
experience, or this has happened to me before type deal,
They could
or
be
not.
scared. Just
Scared. Yep.
Scared of you, you're a stranger, scared of the situation, scared about pain, and they could just not answer you entirely. Not that they can't articulate, but they are just in a trauma position where they can't mentally.
They compensate really well and then they crash.
They do. They compensate very well. Kids typically will compensate. You will typically have normal findings in a kid that's actually sick, but they will continue to compensate until they get to that cliff's edge. And unlike an adult where you might see a steady decline, they are going to drop off the Grand Canyon straight to the bottom. They go down fast. The other thing with normal findings with the kids, especially their airways and breathing, airways especially are smaller, and they sit more anteriorly to their body versus a human, or versus an adult. Yes, because adults are aliens. So there are some anatomical differences between kids and adults, which we will be doing on Monday, I believe. We start in anatomy and physiology on Monday. So we will be talking about all that stuff. some of the differences between adults and pediatrics during that time. That's a 2-night class, just keep in mind too, so we're not going to get through the whole thing Monday night. But yeah, so there's the cognitive things, there's cognitive issues, there's also anatomical differences. All right. Okay. So our characteristics and our primary assessment. So assessments take different forms. Some assessments are very easy to do. Patients are happy to see you. They're forthcoming with information. It's very easy to do. They're very textbook patients. Some patients, some characteristics are pain. It's hard. They don't want to be. They don't want you there. They don't want to talk to you. Maybe they're incapable of talking to you. So it becomes difficult to you. So you have to change up the way you maybe approach the patient. We have to decide: are we here for a medical problem or a trauma problem? Is there any sort of mental status changes? Does it seem like the patient's answering a couple of questions really appropriately, and then the next 5 questions you're like, that doesn't seem right. Like that doesn't make sense with what she just answered. So are we talking about a mental status problem? Or does the patient have some underlying issues like dementia or Alzheimer's? Those are questions you want to ask family. Are they normally good historians for their problem, or are they normally bad historians and like don't believe a word they say because they always exaggerate things? And with those patients, it's always a balancing act between what the family's telling you is going on and what the patient's going on, because you should believe what the patient's going on, but sometimes, like I said, the questions and answers will not match up sometimes. And then obviously, is the patient adult, child, or an infant? Because all this differs with assessing a child. How do we assess an infant being held by mom? If you walk in, if you got called for our kid that's got 104 fever, let's say a 16-month-old, 104 fever, being held by mom. How are you assessing ABCs on these kids?
Mom, can you set them up for me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, have mom.
Have mom like hold the kid for you, have them interact.
How do you think the kid's gonna act?
Probably crying.
You think they're gonna be crying?
No, they're on 4, they're gonna be just going out
Cranky.
of it.
They're gonna be fairly inconsolable. They're gonna be what's a normal 16-month-old gonna do? When they're acting normal, what kind of behavior can you expect to see? But seriously, what kind of behavior might you see?
Them playing,
normal?
running around.
They're typically moving, looking around, learning, right? Well,
Getting
young
into everything.
young kids when they're sick to the point of being sick that's worrying,
They don't want to do anything.
they don't want to look at you. They don't want to. They're just gonna look sick. They're gonna have that look like
Listless.
yeah. They're gonna have that. You look sick, and they're not gonna make eye contact with you. They're gonna be inconsolable. They're gonna cry a lot. Again, they're gonna cry, but their mom or even dad might not be able to console them.
They're just gonna want mom. They're just gonna want to be left alone.
Yeah, that's when you know a kid's really sick. So that's actually I don't know why I picked that up. I don't want to pick that up. So yeah, so that's another like different with like infants and children is they will not be acting like a child when they're sick. So our primary assessment is our systematic approach to life threats. Quickly finding, treating life threats. That's the goal of the primary assessment. Remember, A, B, C's, if you don't have one, you don't have life. So we need to make sure all 3 are intact before we move on. That is the point of the general primary assessment. Our primary impression is very subjective, but it gives us that starting point as to what might be going on and what kind of condition the patient's in. General impression will come before, I think if you look at your skill sheet, obtaining your general impression comes before ABCs. Because obviously ABCs typically don't get done until you start talking to the patient, so your general impression will come before ABCs. After we determine that there's no life threats or we've taken care of those, we're going on to determine mental status and then evaluating our ABCs quickly. Or actually, excuse me, yes. doing our AVPU, mental status, then your ABCs really quickly. Now, can you do multiple things at once?
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. There's no reason when you're walking up to somebody that looks like they're unresponsive and you start talking to them and they're not responding, that you start sternal rubbing them and you're looking to see if they're breathing and you're looking at skin color. You can do multiple things at once. And I encourage you, like, as you work through your assessment skills and you become better at these, like, you find ways to do multiple things at once. I do it. Everyone that has experience you will eventually get to the point where you walk in, you will be able to do your entire scene size up, your primary assessment, your AVPU. You will decide all this in about 10 seconds. That's the way after the repetitiveness, you become good at this, to do these things multiple times. So there's nothing wrong with doing multiple steps at once. Like any new skill, we'll walk, we'll crawl, we'll walk, we'll run. So we'll crawl through this assessment steps with you guys, and we'll slowly start getting and speeding things up and getting you guys to the point of doing this in your sleep. I swear to God, this thing does not want. I think the batteries are running low tonight.
They were on Thursday too.
Were they?
Mhm.
All right, I'll change around between classes. Alright, we beat that enough. Alright, commando age man, the male is lying on the street after being hit by a car. He appears unresponsive as you approach. Approach. Might have to have Garrett check me for a stroke tonight. You notice that he is bleeding from a laceration on his forearm and is making gurgling sounds from his airway. What do you guys think?
So the airways,
So immediately
that's the primary part.
put them into
How bad is that
position.
bleed?
Lateral recumbent.
I mean, there's
Like
nothing
lacerating.
saying you can't do both. There's two of you. Somebody put pressure on the wound and somebody else check the breathing.
I'm hearing a lot of things at once and I'm hearing good things. So you said,
Lateral recumbent and suction.
okay,
Get
that's
the airway
good.
back.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Someone else asked how bad the bleeding is. Doesn't really say. So let's say,
But
okay, let's say it's gushing. How does that change what you want to do?
Tourniquet on it first.
and then the airway.
Good.
But
Good.
forearm probably wouldn't be.
Well, you still got arterial bleed. You bleed out.
Yeah.
You can still bleed out.
Yeah.
You still got the radial artery running
Yeah.
down through there. Any arterial bleed is considered massive bleeding.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if it's down here at the wrist or if it's up here at the elbow or it's up here or it's here. If it's arterial, it's massive bleeding. It's considered insanguinating bleeding. You fix that. Any arterial bleed. Or anything you believe to be arterial. Not all blood sometimes, not all bleeding sometimes will look arterial, but will be arterial in nature. So if you think the blood is too much to cover with natural pressure, put a tourniquet on. So good. No, that's good. Yeah, treat the bleeding, suction them, or right lateral recumbent while you get the suction. If you
Hit by
have
a car, neck injury,
Oh, he's probably.
good. So someone wants to do what?
spinal immobilization,
You're
well,
gonna do
That's a-
manual.
Manual stabilization.
Yep.
Something. Yep.
roll him on his side and hold his head and whatever.
Yep. Good.
Check C-spine and all that.
Perfect. If you're alone, what factors do you consider to decide what to do first?
How much blood, and then jaw thrust, and then
Okay.
Recovery
If you
position
can.
by yourself.
Call for
recover.
additional resources.
What are you doing that first, or are you going to treat some things first?
Treat some
Treat
things
it.
first and then call.
Good. Yeah, I definitely want to do something like right lateral recumbent. Even though the patient may have a spinal injury, like
You got-
at this point,
Not breathing
well, so
or dead.
actually no, this brings up a good point. Patient may have a spinal injury, right? Got hit by a car, but airway's an issue.
Like over
But
there.
you need to go back to your car to get your phone to call 911. So do you leave them in right lateral and let the neck hang, or
Yes.
Yes.
yes?
Life over limb.
Right. If your airway's not clear, you're not going to live, right?
Correct.
So we fix the airway, we leave them, we go call 911, then we come back and we fix the issue. Life threats take priority over other injuries. If that person ends up with a spinal cord injury, Your priority was life threats. Airway was a life threat, so it got treated first. So you did not cause any serious harm to that patient. You saved their life in reality. Because if you had left them on their back, theoretically they could stop breathing and aspirate before you get back to them and could stop breathing. Cool, good. Awesome, let's take a break before we do the last one. After you do those things, we've determined that there's no life threats. We've got our general impression. What do we do now? What's the next step to assessment? And that is, now we're going to get into identifying complaints. We're going to talk a little bit about questioning tonight. We're going to go into just a little bit of detail about each of the some of the different systems out there. And the biggest thing we're going to do is we're going to learn a couple of some mnemonics tonight. We're going to learn sample history, and we're going to learn OPQRST. So these two things are basically what you're going to use on pretty much every patient to determine what's going on with patients. Determine how long it's been going on, severity of what's going on, their medical history, medications they're taking. All this is going to be during this question phase. All right, so we have history has two different components. We have history of the present illness. Then we also have past medical history, abbreviated as HPI and PMH. History of present illness is what we're going to be looking for probably first. What is going on with the patient at this time? Okay. Usually we talk to the patient. Usually this is where we're talking to the patient. Sometimes we might have to get it from the family depending on what happened. But our primary person that we're talking to is the patient. Family members, bystanders are great if they're there and the patient can't respond. Looking at medications, you can write an entire patient's medical history just by looking at their medications. Google's your friend in this case. You'll eventually learn that what medications are used for what. It'll be second nature, but medications change every day. So new meds are always being invented and used. So sometimes you'll say, I don't recognize that. Google and look it up. So you can write a patient's medical history right from a med list. And then other things you observe at the scene. When we walk in, we're developing a rapport with these patients. Remember, we're there to help them. We're not there because they're interrupting our dinner time. We're there to help them. So we're not standing over them. Remember body language is huge in these cases. We're not standing there. We're not standing over people. We're not lording over them like we're the kings of everything. No, we're not doing any of that. We're getting down on their level. How's it going? Looking at them eye to eye. We're developing that rapport. We're talking to them. How's it going? We're using regular conversation to get this started. We're asking open-ended questions. Why are we asking open-ended questions? Why do you think that? Why would we not use closed-ended questions unless you absolutely had to?
Because they might have information that you wouldn't find.
Yeah. They might let the beans spill with an open-ended question. They might, something they're trying to keep hidden, they might let spill. It also allows them to use their own words to describe something instead of asking them, does the pain feel like a pressure? Oh yeah. Well, does it feel, or does it feel sharp? Oh, it feels both. Like, if you ask them, what does the pain feel like, and let them describe it, you get better, accurate.
You're not putting words in their mouth.
Yes, you're not putting words in their mouth. You don't want to do that. You want to get as accurate as a description of pain or nausea or how they're feeling. You want to get their words, not words put into their mouth. So we'll use closed-ended questions if you need if there's some sort of immediate answer you need, you can use a closed-ended question. Trying to think of one off the top of my head here, and the one's not coming to me.
Do you feel safe?
Yes.
Did you
that
fall?
That can be one. Do you feel safe? Did you fall? Something that you need.
Or how
Reason.
far did you fall? Would that be an open-ended?
That's open-ended because height is always. I don't know how good you are at determining a height of something. I'm horrible at it.
How many stairs did you fall down?
Yeah.
Because that's an exact
Again,
number.
Again, it's kind of closed but also open-ended at the same time.
Like yes
So,
or no?
If a paramedic or EMT asked me how many stairs I fell down, I'd probably respond with, I have no idea, I didn't count them.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, how many are there?
Yeah,
Was I at the bottom? Figure
So
it out.
the history helps us paint a picture of what's going on. So when we're asking these questions initially about their current illness or injury, this is helping us paint the picture. So when we're doing this, we're using a mnemonic called OPQRST. Some of you might be. This is basically to learn about the chief complaint. Onset, when did it start? Provocation. Provocation is what makes it better, what makes it worse. Sometimes with chest pain patients, they feel better sitting back. Sometimes breathing patients, if they're leaning back, they might be having difficulty. You sit them up in a good seated position, they might feel better. So that's what provocation is. We want to know, does anything make it better? Does anything make it worse? Quality, this is, what does it feel like? Pain, is it pressure, is it stabbing, is it crushing? This is information that we want to know. Typically a chest pain patient, someone that's having a heart attack, will feel like crushing or pressure in their chest. That is the most common. Typically a stabbing sensation in the chest is worse. Can be related to maybe more of a muscular thing. It can also be chest pain. It can also be cardiac chest pain. Doesn't rule it out. It's just less common. A sharp pain up here in the chest around the heart is actually indicative of what we call a thoracic aneurysm. It's a very bad thing. Typically, if they have it and it lets loose, they're dead within a minute. It's literally a tear at the aorta. So it's not pretty. Never seen one. They're quite very, very rare. Typically, we'll see them more in trauma patients with shearing forces. When we talk about A&P and cardiac stuff, we'll talk about it. There's actually a little ligament that sits right at the aorta that helps keep it anchored. And shearing forces can sometimes yank that ligament. And if that ligament yanks, it can actually put a hole in the aorta, and you'll bleed out through it. But anyway, quality. So that's what we're looking for them to describe what we're hearing. Region or radiation. Does the pain go anywhere? Does it travel from the chest to the arm? Does it go up to the jaw, to the back? They're having abdominal pain that goes from here to here down to the groin. These are all indicative of pain that's in the belly that goes from here to the back or to the groin is indicative of an abdominal aneurysm. Appendicitis typically will have pain in that right lower quadrant that radiates back towards the belly button. Gallbladder is typically right upper. It's usually a dull, sharp pain they might feel. But there's also a lot of other things that can be in there, like cholecystitis and everything can be caused in there. So that's what we're looking for. We're using severity. This is our pain scale, 0 to 10. Some books the book might say 1 to 10.
Yeah.
In reality, I use 0 to 10 just because I like to give them that option of not feeling any pain. 0, no pain. 10 is the worst pain you've ever felt in your life. Where would you rate that? Sometimes patients might look at you like, I don't understand the question, so you can qualify it a little bit with, okay, say 1 was a feather on your chest and 10 was a dump truck sitting on your chest. Or with females that, like older females that you know that might have already talked about their kids or their kids were on scene, you can say 10 is comparable to childbirth and 1 is like a feather on your chest. Where would you rate that pain? So so you can qualify the severity if you're kind of getting that confused look. But I personally like to give them that option of 0 pain.
I think the book does too. It says if 0 is no pain or...
Yep. Some books will use 0, some books, I have seen books in the past that use 1 to 10. And then time is how long this has been going on. So, believe it or not, onset and time, it sounds similar, but it's different. Onset also can be what caused this to start. So did the chest pain start because you were out mowing the lawn, shoveling the driveway in the wintertime? What were you doing when this started? That's onset. So it's also time, but it's also a little bit more quantified of what started this all. So, sample. It's our other one. So, signs and symptoms, allergies, medications, pertinent past history, last oral intake, and events leading up to the injury or illness. So signs and symptoms, again, like I said earlier, signs are what you see, symptoms are what they tell you. Allergies, so they have allergies to anything. Typically we're looking for medication allergies, but also we do want some sort of, are we here for difficulty breathing? So what kind of allergies do you have? Do you have bee allergies? Do you have shrimp allergies? So those might be pertinent allergies you want to know about. Medications, what medications do they take? This helps us with the pertinent, with their past medical history. Do they have high blood pressure? Do they have an EpiPen? Because we're there for trouble breathing, so maybe they're allergic to something. So medications can help clue us into more narrowing down our diagnoses. We want pertinent past history. So when I say pertinent, what does that mean? What do you think that means?
Relevant to what's going on.
Relevant to what's going on. I don't care that they had knee surgery to repair their ACL 40 years ago. Do not care about that.
Would say they said, oh, I had my appendix out 5 years ago, that would be kind of pertinent. If
Sure.
they were complaining of abdominal pain, so you can go out your
100%. That's pertinent history. Someone that's complaining of right lower abdominal pain, but they said, oh, I had my appendix out 10 years ago. Oh, okay, well, that rule, cross that one out and move on to the next thing. So we want pertinent history of what's going on, that's relevant to what's going on. Knee surgery for somebody that's having chest pain, I don't care about. I don't care about that. You can say it politely to the patient, like, okay, anything else like related to the heart or lungs or diabetes or anything like that. Like, I don't really care about like things like that. Last oral intake. Why do you think this is actually important? Why do you think we care about when the last time they drank or ate something?
Well,
We
if
need
they
to
are
tell the hospital if they're in critical condition and they're going to be going
If
into
they're having
surgery.
trouble breathing, it could be why they're having trouble breathing.
Yeah. Biggest one is surgical candidates. They have to go in for any sort of procedure immediately due to what's found. Especially anesthesiologists want to know when the last time they ate, so they can treat for nausea and vomiting for post-operative procedures. That's a big one also. And then events leading up to the injury or illness. What happened? Simple as that. What happened? What were you doing just before this happened?
Last oral intake, diabetics too.
Oh yeah, yep. Yeah, diabetics is a good one. Did you take your insulin and not eat? That happens more often than you think. So when we're assessing children, simple language, use preschool age kids. We're using simple language, school age children. They're going to be able to describe a little bit more of what's going on. You know, the tummy hurts or it hurts down here. You can kind of ask them to pinpoint maybe a little bit more of like, where does it hurt? It hurts right here. So you can use a little bit more. You can use a little bit more adult questions with them, and they're capable of telling you some more information. Include parents, teachers, or other care providers in this interview. Get information from them. Also allow them to be around the kids. That way it puts the kids at ease. If the kids are at ease, they're much more likely to cooperate and answer your questions. So as long as someone can be there that they trust, that helps a lot with kids. I typically will always allow some sort of parent teacher to ride in the back of the truck with a child, just because it puts them at ease and we're scary looking.
I would say that's not true 100% of the time. We've had parents that are so freaking out that they
Makes it worse
inhibit
for them.
everything.
Yes, general rule is yes, but yes, there's extenuating circumstances. I would never let somebody, I would always make sure that the person that's riding or that's with the kid is calm and collected.
Yes.
And if the parent can't be that, then the teacher can be in there, or vice versa, or whatever. It's always going to be, if you're not calm and cooperative or calm and collected, you're not getting in the back of my truck, because I will throw you out of the truck. Well, I shouldn't say that out loud. Anyway, yes, they have to be calm and collected to get into the back of the truck. If you're going to hinder care, you don't need to be there. Follow.
Interesting question. Not sure if it's a rabbit hole or not.
Everything's a rabbit hole with the way my brain works.
If you're suspecting any kind of violence or trauma, CPS related, are you separating the child from their parent on the scene and having PD meet you at the hospital? Are you pretending everything's just fine, realizing you might have limited input from the child because of the dynamic there? You might not be able to get a full and complete assessment, and just have PD meet you at the hospital knowing that you're in a risky situation.
So it's going to be situation dependent. If you can convince the parents to let you take them to the hospital without a parent present in the back, I would do so. I would take that opportunity to, you gave me verbal permission to transport the child to the hospital, take it and go. And then notify PD on the way in to meet you at the hospital, and then also notify the hospital so they can do that or do what they need to do. If the parent is adamant that they want to go and they're not being uncooperative, they're not being belligerent about anything, I would say play it cool, let them come, and then
Make sure everyone turns their radios down in the back and have the person
Well,
driving.
that's my
that's
family.
the other thing.
I've seen
You
people
can
do that.
you can
before,
do
though,
that. I've
so.
done things like that before where the person up front gives the radio report to the hospital, so
Give them
you
the heads
can
up.
turn the radio off in the back or turn it all the way down on the volume. You can do it that way. So there's different ways you can do that, and every situation is going to be very different. So you have to kind of play it by ear and what you feel is the best. But playing it cool, if you have to play it cool and let the parent ride, do it. And then once you get to the hospital and put the patient off, I would take the nurse. Maybe not the nurse that's in there because you're going to want someone in there, but I would go to the doctor or the charge nurse and say, this is what I think. And let them go for there and then go file your CPS report.
Okay.
So
So I was thinking if they get in the back and they're hearing your transition to the hospital, you have no real
Yeah.
opportunity.
if they do get into the back, if they insist on it, keep it on the down low. Don't say anything about it until you get to the hospital. So
Okay.
it's all about protecting the kid, and if saying something's going to put you or the kid at risk, don't do it. But I can't tell you, again, I can't give you specifics, everything has to be kind of played by ear, but those are some options that you do have.
Yeah.
The teacher or the parent can also give you some information. Is he always acting like this? Is he always quiet like this? Is he really loud like this?
Yeah.
Is this abnormal?
Yep. We definitely want to know that behavior side of things with kids. Is it normal, abnormal? So good. All right. So physical exam. So we have 3 primaries: observe, auscultate, palpate. Look, listen, feel. Look at everything, touch everything, and listen to the things that you can listen to, specifically the lungs. So we observe the overall health. We're looking, our eyes are telling us, I see difficulty breathing. I see oxygen on this patient. So I see that this patient probably has COPD or CHF issues in the past. I see they're breathing fast. So these are things that we're looking at. So pediatrics, a little bit more challenging, obviously because we're scary, we're strangers to them. That whole stranger danger alarm is going off in their head, which is good. So we want to, whenever we're dealing with a kid that might look like they're frightened, we want to approach them slowly from a distance. Maybe we start talking to mom or dad a little bit, gain a little rapport with the parents so they can see that we're okay. Let the parents initiate, will you let them just take a look at your arm that you fell on? Let them initiate some stuff. So we want to approach very, very, very slowly. We want to do the least invasive to the most invasive. So we want to do everything we can not to do an invasive procedure on a child or invasive assessment technique on a child. So if you can avoid checking their blood sugar and poking them with a needle, avoid it. Start with the toes of the trunk, work your way to the head. Again, start kind of non-invasive, working towards the places that they don't want you to go, like the head and the chest. Explain everything to the kids before you. Let them play with it, especially if you try to listen to their lungs. Kids love the stethoscope, so you can play with the stethoscope. Let them play with the stethoscope a little bit. Kind of get them involved in things. Don't ever lie to the kid. Just like with any patient, don't ever lie to a patient in general. And then always provide for a patient's privacy. Even this goes for adults too. If you have to strip somebody naked because of a trauma call, try to provide somewhat of some privacy. So once you cut everything off and have identified the injuries, cover them with a blanket or a sheet. Give them some privacy. the windows in the back can still be seen through. So people driving down the highway that are behind you or coming up, they can still see in there in some cases. So make sure we're providing for privacy of patients. Any questions so far? So we're going to get into a little bit more like specific body system examinations. So the most important determination when assessing the respiratory is whether the patient is adequately breathing. So we're going to ask, are you taking your medications as you prescribe? Are they taking their Spiriva? Are they taking their inhaler? How much are they using their rescue inhaler? Have you noticed an uptick in the amount of times you've had to use your rescue inhaler in the last 2 weeks? So we're determining that. Determine the signs and symptoms from previous episodes. When was the last time this happened to you? Oh, well, I was in the hospital about 2 months ago. Okay, do you feel similar do you feel similar now to when you did then? Do you feel like these are the same things? Yeah, you'll get a yes or no. They'll be like, no, this actually feels like worse than last time. Okay, that should be a red flag going off in your head. They spent 3 days in the hospital to do this last time and now it feels worse. Okay, this could be serious. So with respiratory, we're looking mental status, level of respiratory distress. How fast are they breathing? How are they talking to you? Are they talking, I can't breathe? Are they speaking like one word at a time every like 5 breaths? That's what we call, like, that's dyspnea. We would call that one word dyspnea. They get one word out due to the shortness of breath that they're feeling. You can have 2 or 3 word dyspnea. So that's how it's described. That's how you would describe it. How's their chest wall motion? Is it fast? Is it asymmetrical? We're going to listen to their lungs. Do we hear anything? Are we hearing wheezing? Are we hearing inspiratory or expiratory wheezing? Are we hearing just normal like air flowing in and out? It's very possible, especially with like patients that might be hypoventilating or hyperventilating. So anxiety patients, you might listen to their lungs and it just might be nice clear air. They're just breathing super fast. We're going to look at pulse oximetry. We're going to put that on. We're going to check their oxygen saturation. We're going to look for edema. Anyone know? You guys know what edema is?
Swelling.
So edema is swelling, typically with respiratory patient, you're going to find it in the legs.
And you'll know when you see it.
Well, basically, the best way to show it is just all you do is pull up their pant leg a little bit, and you're just going to push along the shin bone a little bit, and you'll know because if they have it, your finger is going to sink in.
It's pretty well noticeable too.
It can be noticeable and it can be very minimal too. So you can have a deep indentation, you can have a shallow indentation. It can be dependent on the severity of the patient's CHF and how well controlled they are. Some patients have CHF and they don't have any edema in their legs. And do they have a fever? What's a fever going to help tell us that they have? Infection, but primarily when we're talking about the lungs, what infection?
Pneumonia.
Pneumonia is the big one. Typically CHF exacerbation or COPD exacerbation with chronic bronchitis or emphysema. Typically you won't see a fever. You can, but it's not as common.
So is COVID, I mean, I know COVID's a different game now, as far as this whole respiratory thing, but does that, probably not now as much as it was earlier, but those symptoms there, I mean.
Yeah, I mean.
You could, I mean. That's
I'm leaving COVID out of this lecture, and
yeah.
But yeah, a lot of that stuff, I mean, COVID fits so many different areas. So, alright, so cardiovascular system, heart, blood vessels, and cardiac patient and patient in shock or with a vascular problem. Do they have existing cardiac conditions? Do they have congestive heart failure? So congestive heart failure can be a heart problem and a breathing problem. Do they have previous heart attacks? Have they had previous bypass surgeries? How can you tell if someone's had bypass surgery?
Pelvic scars.
Yeah, the zipper down the chest. I had a guy last week tell me he's never had any heart problems and he's got a zipper right down his chest.
Yeah, okay.
So.
How do you deal with patients who have
defibrillators?
Yeah, the pacemakers.
Pacemakers? You don't. You just leave them alone. There's nothing you're going to do to that. Just don't put pads over the top of it if you have to. You shouldn't because you don't put pads on the left side. So typically pacemakers, defibrillators will be found up here on the left side. However, they have started putting them on the right side in some cases, so just keep that in mind. Don't ever put, if they do find one on the right side, don't ever put your defib pads over the top of it. Just shift them down or angle them away. So signs and symptoms of an episode. So with our cardio, we want to know, OPQRST is kind of a really big one. We want to know what started these events, how long it's been going on, the severity of everything. We want to be able to track their pain. Is pain getting worse? Is it getting better? Is it staying the same? We really want to know that with chest pain patients specifically. What kind of medications are on? Are they on hypertension meds? If they had past cardiac issues, they're going to have cardiac meds. Most likely drugs like diltiazem, metoprolol, aspirin. They'll be on a daily aspirin, typically a baby aspirin. So there's a lot of different medications out there that you'll see them have. And then the specific characteristics to this discomfort, which goes along with the OPQRST. Is there anything that changes? Is there anything that, anything specific? Does it feel like it's a burning sensation up here? So sometimes patients that are having cardiac problems might think that they're having indigestion, but in turns it's actually heart problems. Other physical signs, pulse, blood pressure, look for JVD, which is jugular vein distension. If blood pressures get super high, you'll actually see the jugular veins actually like pop out. They'll be like actually noticeable. Palpate the chest, find out if it hurts, if it's reproducible chest pain. So reproducible chest pain means if I push on your chest and it hurts the same manner, that's reproducible. If the pain is constant or discomfort is constant, that's non-reproducible. So if I push on your chest and it doesn't hurt any more or any less, that's non-reproducible chest pain. Non-reproducible chest pain is more likely to be linked to a cardiac problem. Again, not 100%, just more likely. And then observe the posturing and the breathing of the patient. How are they sitting? What do they prefer? Nervous system. We really want to know mental status of the nervous system. So nervous system could be anything from dysfunction of the body to stroke patients. So mental status is huge in these patients. Knowing exactly when the symptoms started, knowing how long symptoms have been going on is very important in these patients. This is where we get into our stroke scales and determining dysfunction of the body. Right-sided weakness, left-sided weakness. We also have neurogenic shock that can be a problem with traumatic patients. I've seen one of those before, one in 14 years, and I missed it. Learned about it after the fact, but it was actually quite interesting. Once I learned about it, it was like, oh yeah, no crap, that was like textbook. But basically half your body can like shut down due to like it's usually trauma related, but basically you can get like low blood pressure, you can get low pulse, you can get all these signs of shock, but the patient doesn't look shocked. So it's a very interesting, and we'll talk more when we get into shock and everything about it. But so we really need the mental status. We need to know what normal state of mental functioning is on the patient. So what are they normally like? So is this baseline? Is it baseline that he's sitting here acting like a 2-year-old? Maybe it is for him. You know, or is normal, like he's alert and oriented ×3 all the time. We want to know these things. We want to obtain the history of neurological conditions. Do they have a history of Bell's palsy? Do they have dementia, Alzheimer's? Do they have any of this stuff? And then, really importantly, is what's the patient's speech like? Speech doesn't necessarily always relate to stroke. It can also be it's also a symptom of Bell's palsy, which is another neurological issue with the face and the brain. Is it slurred? Is it normal? Some patients that have had strokes in the past might have some baseline slurring due to where they had their stroke. So find out, is it worse? Is it better? Is it normal? We really want to know that information. Physical, we're going to perform a stroke scale. Just debating whether or not I want to show you that now or if we'll do that later. I think we'll do it later when we get to neurological dysfunctions and neurological issues. So we're going to do a stroke scale. This state we use the Cincinnati scale. It's a 3-step process. It's pretty simple. It takes about 20 seconds to do. We want to check for peripheral sensation and movement. Are they able to move everything normally? Do they have normal? We'll ask them to squeeze our fingers, push against our hands like a gas pedal. pull up on them, pull up with our feet. Everything should be equal. If one side's weaker than the other, that's not good. We don't want that. You want to note that. Gently palpate the spine. So with accidents and whatnot, we're going to walk our fingers right down the spinal column. We're going to be feeling for any sort of like broken bones in there. We're going to be feeling for any pain. So you might push and they might go, ow, that hurts. Those are the things we're looking for. Extremity strength, we just talked about. That's grip strength, how well they're pushing and pulling with their feet. Check for pupils. So we want to see if they're equal, reactive. So we take a little flashlight, shine it in and out. And then also gait. Anyone know what gait is?
Balance.
Yeah, it's your balance, the way you walk. So if they get up and they're walking, you can ask them, is that how they normally walk? Oh yeah, no, yeah, that's how they do. Perfect, that's normal. Or are you looking for, someone that's drunk? That would be more of an abnormal gait. Endocrine system, well, there's only one thing we're going to touch on here. Diabetes. There are a ton of other endocrine system issues out there. They're typically more on the rarer side of things. Diabetes will be the most common one we run into. So, diabetes mellitus can also have they're going to throw in some thyroid disease history here. So do they have a hyperactive thyroid or underactive or hypothyroid? They have medications for it. What medications are they taking for diabetes? That's the big one we really want to know with diabetes. Insulin, yes. We really want to know what insulin they're taking. Fast acting, slow acting, both. Or are they not insulin dependent? Are they type 2 diabetics where it's more diet control than medication control? What have they eaten recently? What kind of energy have they exerted? Have they had a more exertive day because they've been out running around with their nephews over for a visit, so they've been running around the yard for more and they haven't eaten anything more or taken in any extra sugar. So now their sugar's 35 instead of 80. Has the patient been sick recently? Being sick can change the way blood sugar functions. So really want to know, have they had any recent sicknesses? And then we want to get their blood glucoses. A lot of diabetics are actually pretty good about tracking their sugars. So you can always ask to see, like, oh yeah, no, the last week I've been running really high. And when you look at their records, they've been, 350, 375, 400, 450. Yeah, you've been running really high. So that can give you an idea of how things have been going over a time period with their blood sugars. And then also look ask them if they have an insulin pump. It's typically worn down here on the side, on their belt. Needle will typically, those are monitors.
Oh, okay.
So if you see one, some of them have a little thing here. Those are typically just little monitors where they can take their phone and they can open their app and they go just like this and it tells them what their blood sugar is. Really cool app. They don't have to poke themselves or anything. It's like basically a needle, I think, that gets changed out every 30 days or something like that. And it's literally like a sticker that goes over it. It's actually kind of a cool little thing. But insulin pumps typically get worn right here. There's usually there'll either be a needle here or some diabetics will run the needle down their pant leg and it'll be just inside the thigh in some places. They'll use it, and that's basically just a constant influx of the insulin pump basically reads the blood sugar and delivers insulin based on the blood sugar at the time. So it's actually pretty cool. A lot of diabetics have gone from unstable to stable diabetics with the advent of the pumps. Pumps can malfunction, just like any piece of technology. If someone does have low blood sugar, they have a pump and they're unable to shut it off, you can either pull the needle out or shut the pump off to give them sugar. So we want mental status is big in this. Are they acting normal? Are they verbally, painfully, or are they unresponsive? Observe the skin. What do you think a diabetic with low blood sugar is going to have for skin?
Cool and clammy.
Cool, clammy, pale, pretty much. What do you think what if they're high though?
Sweaty.
Sweaty, pale, cool.
Trick question.
Could be the same actually. Typically someone that's high in blood sugar, they're still going to be conscious and alert talking to you.
That's a form of shock. They're going into a diabetic shock.
Diabetic shock is low.
Oh. The high
So
is.
high can be a form of shock. You can be unresponsive with it. It just it's going to be something that's going to be, we're not fixing it in the field. High blood sugar takes a long time, can take hours and hours to bring down to a normal because it has to be brought down at a very specific rate. And it involves potassium and insulin and albuterol and a number of calcium gluconate or calcium chloride. Requires a number of medications to do.
Yeah.
Yes, some of it we can start at the medic level, other things we can't. Patients typically that have high blood pressure or high glucose will also be very dehydrated. So they need lots of fluid, like 3-4 liters of fluid. So we're going to obviously get a blood glucose reading. Look for a pump. Look for medical jewelry. A lot of diabetics wear the bracelets or the necklaces.
Some even have tattoos.
Some people have tattoos. Tattoos are a little harder to look for, though.
She had it right on her wrist, and it says type 1 diabetic.
Perfect. That's a good place for it to be. Somebody's. I've seen people that put it like on their chest and stuff. And it's like, well, I'm not going looking on their chest. Like I'd rather it be like on their wrist or their forearm for stuff like that. GI system. What are we looking for? What's gone in? What's come out? And what's it look like when it comes out? It's yeah, I love the GI system. But no, what we're talking about is there any pain or discomfort when they have a bowel movement, when they vomit? What kind of oral intake have they had? Has it been just water? Have they been sick recently? Do they have any known GI issues like cholecystitis or ulcers? Things like that. So we want to know what kind of history they have. Have they been vomiting along with the nausea? And how have their bowel movements been? Get used to asking about poop, guys, because you're going to ask about it a lot. How has their poop been? Has it been feeling normal? Has it been really soft? Has it been diarrhea? Has it been dark in color? Has it been bright red in color? If it's bright red, it's bad. Actually, and if it's dark, like coffee ground looking black, it's also bad too.
Mm-hmm.
Signs of GI bleeds. Bright red can be hemorrhoids sometimes too, typically also indicative, but can be indicative of a lower GI bleed. So we want to ask these questions. We want to know about this. And the opposite goes for vomiting. We want to know what the vomiting looks like. Is it bright red? Are they coughing up? Or do they have some sort of esophageal varices where they're bleeding? Are they having bleeding ulcers in their stomach? Do they have an upper GI bleed where they're vomiting black coffee ground looking vomit? Like, we want to know these questions, so we want to know the answers to all this. We want to know. Observe their position. How are they? Assess the abdomen. Patient's position, they may be hunched over, they may be gripping at their belly because it hurts, especially kids. We want to touch the abdomen, we want to feel it. The abdomen should feel soft and non-tender. You should be able to push in on all 4 quadrants, and it should not hurt anywhere on people.
Anytime can it be hard?
If it's hard, that's bad. You might see a harder abdomen with patients with like liver failure that have like ascites. They might have liver failure, they might have a distended abdomen because of it, so it might feel harder. Typically hardness is related to like blood or fluid in there. Inspect other parts of the GI system, so look in the mouth, make sure everything, see if there's anything in there, anything caught in there. Hi Derek.
Hi.
Inspect inspect the vomit or feces if it's available.
Gross.
Okay, we're not saying put your gloves on and go digging through it.
Yeah.
But what we're saying is take a look at it. If someone just had a bowel movement and they haven't flushed, take a look. Okay, it looks normal brown. Okay, cool. Oh, no, that's bright red. No, we need to get you to the hospital right now because you're probably bleeding out your butt right now. We're not saying go digging through. We're just saying take a look, try to assess what it looks like so you can also pass on no, he's telling the truth. It was bright red or it was really dark and tarry. All right, immune system. Really the only relevant immune system issue we're ever going to deal with is anaphylaxis. So, we want to know what kind of history do they have with allergies. Is it food-borne allergies? Is it medication-borne allergies? Is it environmental, so bee stings? Poison ivy can also, I've heard cases of poison ivy and poison oak having anaphylactic reactions with patients. And then what do their reactions typically look like? Do they get just a general like, oh, I just break out into hives, but never had any like airway issues? You know, what's a typical reaction for them? Do they have any asthma associated with this? And then, do they have tightness in the chest or the throat? Is there any GI distress? Are they nauseous? Are they itchy from the rash and hives? And then, do they have medications for the allergic reaction? So do they keep Benadryl on them 24/7? Do they keep an EpiPen 24/7 around them? You want to know about those medications. We want to inspect the point of contact with the allergen. So take a look around if they get stung by a bee. Take a look around, make sure it's what it looks like. Assess the skin for rash and hives. We want to look at the face, lips, mouth for swelling. We're looking for a swollen tongue. We're looking for maybe even swollen lips. Swollen face can happen, so they get that puffy look to them. How are they speaking? Are they starting to develop a difficult time speaking because their throat starts to close up? And then we also want to listen to their lungs. So we're listening for adequate breathing, and we're also listening for any sort of like wheezing that might be going on in there. Anaphylaxis obviously requires, if they have any sort of airway compromise, you want to give them epi. As Garrett told you or taught last class with general pharmacology, the EpiPen is your friend. State of Vermont also has a program called Ready, Check, Inject, which allows the EMTs to draw up a syringe of Epi 1 to 1,000 and deliver it in the leg. Musculoskeletal, we're going to rarely see these. Mostly we're going to see MS patients, which is also a nervous system problem also. But patients that have musculoskeletal issues are pretty rare that we're going to see in the EMS. They're typically going to be chronic patients that we're going to eventually see after they're unable to move anymore, where we might be taking them to the hospital due to UTIs and maybe doctor's appointments for pressure ulcers that they have. Those are the times that we're typically going to see those patients. Prior injuries are in. They break their back. We have someone in town that is a paraplegic that we deal with quite often. He became a paraplegic from a diving accident. Those types of things we want to know about. Do they take blood thinning medications? Patients like these, because of the sedentary lifestyle, are very likely to develop DVTs and pulmonary embolism, so they're typically on blood thinners. Common blood thinners you might see are warfarin or Coumadin, Xarelto, and which one am I forgetting? There's a third one. Eliquis. Those are the three common ones that you'll see. Patients will say aspirin. Aspirin is not considered a blood thinning medication. Ask them about underlying diseases or conditions that might make fractures more common. So osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, things like that can increase the likelihood of patients to have like just fractures.
Yeah, that's pretty common in the elderly population too. So a lot of your, like little old lady fall down, go boom, with that can result in some pretty good injuries.
Yeah. And there are some people that have some really severe osteoporosis out there. I had a lady one night, she stood up out of bed and broke her femur. Didn't do anything. She literally stood up out of bed and her femur snapped in half.
Ouch.
So you want to ask about those conditions, especially when you go to these calls that like, well, how did you hurt your leg? Oh, I stood out of bed. Okay, that's where the medical history is going to come in. Oh, you have severe osteoarthritis. Okay, let's be very careful moving you.
Just made of glass.
Basically. So we're looking to inspect the site of the injury. We're looking for deformities. So you'll see them. You'll feel them when you start touching the arms. You're touching the arms. You're going to touch the legs. You're going to circumferentially, basically go right down the arm. And you're gonna be feeling for deformities or any other areas of it. So, suspected injury, we want to compare the sides for symmetry. Actually, this happened just the other day. Lady actually got pulled around by her dogs and got her arm caught behind her and slammed into a railing on her porch.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
You were on that with me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I first felt her arm, I didn't really feel a deformity over here. And then she was in a lot of pain, and we couldn't really get her splinted well, so I decided we'll give her some pain medication first. Well, as I'm standing over her, getting ready to start the line, I kind of see she moved her arms just slightly, and I saw both her arms like this, and this arm was nice and straight, right up this way. And this one goes up, comes right here, and it goes just like this.
Yeah, there you
And
go.
I'm like, oh. He goes, yeah, that's deformed. that's the bone right there. So it turns out she basically snapped her humerus in half. Yeah. Saw the x-ray. It was pretty gnarly. So compare the sides for symmetry. Compare, especially legs with hips. When you dislocate a hip, typically the affected side will actually shorten and will typically rotate. Typically hips will rotate laterally, where if you break your femur, usually above the mid shaft, typically you will rotate medially. And when I say it, like your leg will literally, the foot will lay flat on the bed.
Yes, like flat right on the ground or bed. Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to compare for symmetry. Once you get good enough at feeling what a normal hip looks like, you'll be able to like reach in there and actually sometimes feel that the hip is dislocated. Like with elderly populations, like I can feel the hips and basically reach in through like the buttocks area and feel like you can feel the fact that there's a gap where there's not supposed to be a gap.
Yeah.
Same with shoulders. So you want to compare for symmetry. If they're symmetrical, most likely dislocation or breaks are a little lower on the suspicion list, or it's like more of a hairline fracture.
Yeah, and hip injuries in elderly population are very common, like all the time. So
Yeah, you'll see quite a few of them. Be alert for crepitus or crepitation, which is bone grinding on bone, I guess is the best way to describe it. It's you'll know it when you feel it.
It's very weird. Like
It's, when you feel it, you'll feel it, and you'll feel the bone move, and you'll feel it kind of like rub against each other. It's kind of it's kind of a moment.
It's kind of like if you're doing it, like when you're doing CPR, like you make fractures from ribs and stuff, and you feel this like popping under your fingers.
Yeah,
Like,
that's actually probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah, it's kind of like the same way. It's like you're like feeling the leg, and it's kind of like, and you're like, okay, we're not gonna move that anymore.
We're going to be assessing these patients head to toe if there's multiple injuries. What time is it?
9 o'clock.
7,
9.
I'm going to end it here tonight.
Yeah.
I'm going to have Garrett take critical thinking Thursday night, because this goes into differential diagnoses and determining how to start narrowing things down. So this in itself could take us an hour to do, or another half hour. So I'll delay this, and this will be less time you have to hear him drone on about ambulance operations next class. So we'll do this. I'll let him know, and we'll have you. We'll finish this lecture on Thursday.
Is that next class like an actual like